Okay, so a day later than planned. Welcome. Lot to discuss. Lot to discuss. Where to begin? Obviously, this time last week, the Major League Baseball London series was close to its conclusion between the Cubs and the Cardinals. The series was split one game apiece, which I think was a fair ending to both games. Really, first game was a blowout, second game was a grind, but that happens. I think the conditions had an impact to play on that. Obviously, the Ashes is ongoing. The Tour de France has begun. There's been a fatality at Spa this weekend. I think in a Formula Three race. Young driver unfortunately killed in an accident at Spa. So Spa's claimed another victim, which is a crying ass shame. But motorsport is motorsport. It's never going to be truly 100% safe. I don't think you can ever get to that stage. The Tour de France has started amidst much social unrest in France. It's going to be interesting to see how the ongoing social unrest in France is going to impact the Tour de France this year. This follows on from that fatality in the Tour de Suisse. So there's concerns about rider safety, especially on descents and on high speed sections of pro cycling when you're on the roads, which again, we have seen obviously fatalities there in recent years, and it's been brought to the fore again with another high profile crash of a young promising rider. And again on a dangerous descent. So we're going to see what happens in the Pyrenees and the Alps this year in the Tour de France. It's going to be very, very interesting to see how they make the descent safer. But yeah, a lot going on. Obviously, we had NHL free agency and the draft since the last live stream. And there's going to be a lot of player movement in the off season for the NHL, and of course we've got the Women's World Cup, which starts at the end of this month in Australia and New Zealand. We'll be watching that with great interest. I will cover as many games as I can, and of course, State of Origin has concluded. Well, it hasn't concluded, but it's 2-0 to Queensland. There's a possibility of a clean sweep, which rarely happens, even with those dominant Queensland and New South Wales sides of the past. A clean sweep rarely happens. Will the Rugby World Cup and Olympics be affected? The Rugby World Cup maybe, but that's still, at the end, that's in September. The Olympics, well, there's already an ongoing investigation into the organisation side of the Olympics involving embezzlement and corruption. So the Olympics has already become a bit of a political hot potato. This comes hot on the back of withdrawing from hosting the Rugby League World Cup. So France has got a lot of issues that it's got to confront. There's been a lot of protests against the government for several years now, even before COVID, the Yellow Vest movement and the protests against Macron's government have been going on for 5 or 6 years now. At various points, there's been flare-ups. I think they've been going since 2018, 2019. The Yellow Vest movement really started to get going. So there's been social unrest in France for a while. The last time we saw disorder on this scale, which was not economic disorder, basically with strikes and anti-government protests, was back in 2005. And I remember that quite vividly all those years ago, 18 years ago. I was at school at the time, and uh, what happened there was very similar. There was an incident involving police and a couple of young lads dying, very similar to what happened in Cardiff a month or so ago. A lot of social unrest in deprived areas, and it spread, I think, over a 2-week period to many major metropolitan areas in France, and even into some more regional, provincial towns and cities in France. It got very, very heated, the unrest. Very similar things happening here. It's 2 decades later, near enough. And yeah, the unrest is quite noticeable. It will be interesting to see the security side of things, with policing and security surrounding, especially the Rugby Union World Cup, which is where fans are generally well behaved in rugby union, so I can't see there being a lot of fan disorder. But the security protocols they put in place, because some of the host stadiums are in cities which do have a lot of inequality in them and unrest. Paris, obviously, the Stade de France, look what happened there at the Champions League final. Um, um, France has always had this uh, protests kind of culture within the Republic, the revolutionary style of culture since the 1790s, 1780s. France has always had this in its society. It's a very politically conscious society. Um, but will the IOC consider it? I mean, look, the IOC doesn't really have a leg to stand on when it comes to taking the moral high ground. Let's be clear here, though. The IOC has obviously taken the Olympics to some rather undesirable locations where human rights abuses happen quite regularly. Same with FIFA and other major sporting bodies, which can't really use the moral high ground. But I think the French government is in a difficult position. Emmanuel Macron is and his domestic policies in France aren't overly popular with a lot of French people from all walks of life in French society. This isn't just angry French youth and disenfranchised minority. This is a bigger thing. The Olympics itself is starting to become a bit of a political hot potato in France, very similar to the Olympics in Japan at Tokyo, for different reasons. Um, I think I think security protocols are going to be very, very interesting. There's already travel advice out from the British Foreign Office about advice when you're travelling either to or through France. A lot of tourists and business people go to France for work and holiday. I remember a couple of my extended family used to own property in France and live in France and had to move back for health reasons. So it's interesting. Yes, my migraine. I just felt a bit rough yesterday. I've had a very crappy time at work recently. The body's feeling a bit sore, a bit run down. I just think I was just out of it, and I've been a bit out of it this morning. But I'm feeling a bit better. I had a bit of disrupted sleep last night, but I've been half with it, half not with it. But yeah, I was watching the hockey guys draft. Not like free agency live stream, and then I just got a banging headache. And I thought looking at a bright screen with a bright light going is not conducive to is that bright. That's fully bright. And just yes, that is fully bright. So it's bright colour. So yeah, looking at a bright screen and having a bright side light on with a headache wasn't particularly pleasant. But yeah, just a bit of wear and tear. I've got a week off in a week's time, so I'll be able to do a bit more content, more live streams, and more engagement. But I'm feeling a lot better, but still tired and worn out. The weekend isn't long enough. Yes, the London 2012 Olympics, and obviously what happened in 2011 was quite fresh in people's minds. I remember 2011. I was spending a lot of time at my ex-partner's house with her family, and she worked in Kingston upon Thames, which is one of the boroughs of London. And I was working in Guildford at the time, and I would commute, get the train from either work or my home uh, on the weekends, every other weekend, to just the outskirts of southwest London. She actually lived in Surrey, but I would have to go into London to come out of London to on the transport. And one of my trains from work one night was badly vandalised because of said riots. Didn't get home till 11. And then the following day, at 9, I probably had to get up for work at like 5:30, so I had no sleep. But I remember the 2011 riots quite vividly, spending a lot of time in and around London. My ex-partner got sent home from work early one day and was told, "You're getting 2 days paid leave. We've been advised by the Metropolitan Police and the council to shut early or have reduced opening hours or not open at all." So she got 2 days paid off. And then there was a bit of disorder in Kingston upon Thames, which is possibly the safest borough in London, and they were told to go home. But it was very, very visible on the news. There was a lot of tension. Um, there was a lot of tension in the air. I remember it quite vividly because there were fears that every major urban area, even in the parts of the world which you think would be quite pleasant and peaceful, like some of the south coast resorts, like Bournemouth, for example, could flare up as well. There was major disorder across the country, not just in London. And yeah, there was a lot of concerns going into the Olympics 11 years ago about that. A lot of the tension had come out of the air by 2012. The situation with the London, well, what started off in London and spread to the rest of the country is very similar to what's happening in France right now. but not where the issues in society that the UK faces compared to what France faces are actually also different. There's a lot more to it than just a simple police traffic stop that ultimately led to a tragic death. There's a lot more to it than that. Especially in French urban areas, there's a lot more to it. Some of the situations are similar, some are different. Um, but yes, that was fresh on the minds of a lot of people, especially the US media. They, they really are very populist media in the US. The US media really jumped upon it. Um, but things were similar in the US before the World Cup in 1994 with the LA riots, for example. There was a lot of discussions then. I was obviously very, very young at the time, but when I went to school, my maths teacher in my first year at my secondary school was actually living in LA at the time of the LA riots. And there was a similar discussion before the World Cup in 1994 in the US because of what happened in Los Angeles not long prior. Very, very big discussion about security protocols and the potential for further social unrest. So we shall see what happens with the Rugby World Cup and the Olympics and other major sporting and social events like music concerts and things like that going forward over the next 6 to 12 months. Uh, there's a lot of tension in the air in France. What do I think of this new international rugby union tournament over 2 years? It doesn't solve the problems of club rugby at professional and semi-pro levels with finance. It doesn't solve the issues of rugby union. And I mean, I don't know. I'm not really. I haven't read enough on the tournament format I haven't read up enough about it to form an opinion. But at the same time, it doesn't solve. I don't think it solves the issues that rugby's facing right now on a financial level at the club level. That's top level professional and then that secondary semi professional or lesser professional game where maybe like emerging leagues like Major League Rugby, for example, it doesn't solve the problems of money in the game. Um, from what I've read online, a lot of people aren't in favour of the format. Let's just say that. And a lot of people say it then devalues Lions tours and those international tours. From it basically says to fans, we're not going to have every year the Southern Hemisphere nations coming to the Northern Hemisphere for their month-long autumn internationals, and vice versa when the Northern Hemisphere nations go to the Southern Hemisphere for their tours as well. And then those other tier one and tier two nations, both north and south of the equator, who like your Japans and your Georgias, who will be playing games. It doesn't. All it's going to do is enrich a handful of unions. It doesn't really solve club rugby's financial issues at all. And I don't know how, because we're talking about load management as well in rugby union. Rugby league, not so much, which I find very, very interesting, but there's less internationals in rugby league. But when we talk about load management and player welfare, does it actually, I mean, is this what rugby needs? There's players who basically lost their jobs, and that is their form of income to support their families and their loved ones. Especially, let's say if you've got a young family, or you may be the sole earner. Let's say you might be a rugby player, and of course your parents may have an illness or passed away, and you may have a younger sibling or another relative you've got to look after. Does this actually solve the money? Because some of these young kids who are younger professionals may not have come from the semi-pro or amateur ranks. They may have gone through an academy, which one of the lads I went to school with went through London Irish's academy to then go on to playing Super Rugby, and then he came back. I think he's now playing for Bristol or Bath. But some of these players have only very similar to association football or soccer. They've come through an academy system, and this is the only job they've known. So there is um, an issue there. Oh, what have I buggered up the title? Oh God, I've buggered up the title. I'll have to edit. Oh yes. Uh, I can edit the title. It's weird that it's July. I can't believe it's only like just over 5 months to. There you go. I've edited the title. Yes, there is an edit app option. Um, um, Soap operas. Christ. I don't even watch Netflix at the moment, partly because I'm waiting for The Witch to come out at the end of the month. But there are certain. I mean, what do you class as a soap opera or a crime drama? Because there's certain. I mean, I've got some of my DVD box sets. Again, haven't watched them for a while, but I like programs that are like sort of crime based, be it on the criminal standpoint, like Peaky Blinders or Chicago PD on the law enforcement standpoint. Things like EastEnders, if they were to truly reflect society, they would A, have to be on later in the evening, and B, they would have to change their format. You would have to see more sex, nudity, swearing, and violence to really represent what's happening in society. Um, there's been what was it, Heartbreak High I used to watch as a kid growing up. The new series came out. It's a bit they watered it down as time went on. When it first came out, the first two series were actually quite adult for what is basically aimed at teens and young adults. Yeah, they actually covered a lot of very serious topic, you know, nature of topic like drug abuse, homelessness, violence, criminality, things like that. And they watered down the seriousness of the content a little bit and tried to add more pointless humour, which one of the reasons why it ended up being cancelled originally, and partly because of funding and other issues with the media at the time in the late 90s, early 2000s. But things like EastEnders and Coronation Street, I mean, look at what happened to Brookside. Gone. Crossroads came and went twice. So some what we call soap operas have been and gone. Others have endured, like Coronation Street, Emmerdale, and EastEnders, but their viewing figures are stagnating or slowly dropping. Um, and there's various reasons for that. I mean, I mentioned, I think, in one of my previous videos that I did in the last couple of days that I no longer watch. I mean, I was reviewing the Major League Baseball series. In the last 4 years, I've switched off TV. The only time I've actually really watched TV is if I'm at someone's house or around my mum's for the day, and that's very rare. Um, so I haven't really. I've only watched a limited amount of television in the last 3.5, 4 years. Um, we'll see. But that's an interesting one. My view on television habits. I don't really watch TV anymore because I can watch everything on the laptop that is on TV on live stream. So technically, I am watching TV, but I'm not because what I'm interested in. Yeah, I think Netflix are offering a deal at the moment for 4.99 a month for a basic package, which is actually very reasonable. And I am due to have a pay rise soon, backdated, and I've got a bit more pay this month, which means I'm a bit better off this month because of a lot of overtime. So I'm considering getting Netflix, and half the shit on Netflix has been on TV anyway, and you can get a whole series in a box set basically, rather than having to wait a week for the next episode or syndication mid season reruns. Um, so yeah, TV's traditional media. I wouldn't class TV as traditional media. I think it became traditional because you had radio, you had newspapers, magazines, then radio comes along, then TV, then the internet. So TV is that second generation traditional media. It's got to evolve, but even the internet and streaming is finding difficult. We're at a crossroads, I think, on that one. Thoughts on Osasuna being banned from Europe to a match fixing incident and Sevilla transferring their house, which the league has been a mess for decades. Where have you guys been? The league has been in this situation for 20 years. I mean, Deportivo La Coruña, who I've got to do a video on, are currently in the Spanish third tier. Valencia narrowly avoided relegation. Espanyol, got a ground share with Barcelona because Barcelona apparently can afford a new stadium rebuild. How? I don't know. Barcelona and Real Madrid can just flout financial spending rules and ignore their debts because they're not actually technically companies; they're membership clubs. So you've got to be a member. So they're not truly companies in the true sense. They're cooperatives. Of course, La Liga's in a mess. Of course. Where's everyone been? Football's in a mess in general. This is not just a La Liga issue. I mean, Christ, I've got Reading. I haven't mentioned Reading. Yeah, with their three failure on three occasions to pay their players, a points deduction, a transfer embargo, and another breach of spending rules, and one of the investors buggering off with all the money. I mean, come on. Reading may not be a club this time, next month. They're in a Derby County situation and a Chelsea situation where they may not actually be a football club. I mean, both those clubs obviously survived. Derby, obviously, this time last year it was a Derby done. Chelsea with the Abramovich situation, then Todd Bowley coming in. I mean, they've got a winding up order. Football's in a mess. Where have people been? COVID just sped up the exposure of the mess that we're in, and now we there's allegations about Barcelona paying referees. So it's not just us assuming football's in a mess. Does transfer news interest you? Not really. It used to, not really. I mean, the reason why we're now a sports channel is because of Neymar getting, well, one of the reasons why is Neymar getting transferred to PSG and the Newcastle United, tax fraud investigation, which was to do with transfers, ironically. But now, most of it's speculation and rumor mill, which is what I call clickbait. Which is for me, I could make a lot more views and get a lot more subscribers, but that's not an authentic way of doing it. Um, yeah, so I'm not really interested in transfer news now because I've fallen out of love with football. I will still cover it. I will still watch, cup games and internationals. I think they're the best form of football. League football doesn't interest me at all. Um, So yeah, to me, football was if I've got to do my top, that revisiting my favourite sports in order and where I put them and my favourite leagues because football isn't in the top five right now. Even pro cycling's just plummeted, tennis is plummeted. So it, I think I think certain sports I've lost that connection to over recent years. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Accessibility being one, scandals surrounding them being another, and I'm even falling out of love with rugby union, a sport I played at a decent amateur level. I'm really at this point looking at it, going, I have some concerns about where professional sports heading, but that's maybe not just me, but I've got to do my favourite sports. Where we are right now. Yeah, the older you get, the time does go past faster. I mean, I've been living in my apartment now for nearly 3 years next month. In a month and a half's time, I've been here 3 years. It seems like yesterday I moved into this apartment. Time has flown by. Reading is in the right. Yes, yeah, Reading is a shambles. I work with a lot of Reading fans because it is our local club, professional club. Um, so there's three Reading fans who talk about Reading all the time. That is what they live and breathe. Um, and one of them is really up to date with everything that goes on. He really knows his stuff. I mean, he comes up with some funny shit, but when it comes to his football club and being on top of it, he knows more about the Reading situation than I think the press do, because he lives and breathes this football club. He takes his kids to games and all that. Um, um, I think, yeah, the situation at Reading, what are the EFL doing in regards to, again, the director's test or the fit and proper persons test, depending how I mean, clearly this Reading is another example of why we need that independent regulator. And we could argue about some of the clubs that have fallen into the non-league, like Southend, in a similar position to Reading, ironically. The Derby County situation last year, Wigan are in a similar strife. So yeah, I think the Reading situation is another reason why we do need an independent regulator because the Football League, Premier League, and the FA are just doing a really shit job. Same with the away from FIFA, it's shocking. Yeah, rugby union, I've fallen out of love with it. I think, will I watch the Rugby Union World Cup? Yeah, I'll watch as many games as I can, but for me, the sport is again at a crossroads financially, and with all the rule changes they're bringing in, I do have some long term concerns about rugby union going forward. I think the sport's been very reactionary. It is facing litigation from ex players and ex players' families. How far back do you go though when it comes to player welfare and pension payments and healthcare payments? A lot of the people involved in the litigation played in the amateur days and the semi-pro days. So um, yeah, So we'll see what happens there. I'm all right, thank you. Rugby league history. I haven't had a FIFA game myself for about 20 years. My cousins, obviously, my friends always got FIFA, but I tuned out after FIFA 2000, 2004, 2005. The one with Thierry Henry on the cover. I've still got it. Um, I think it was the first or second one on PlayStation. Yes, I think it was the first one. That's how far back. About 18 years ago. 18, 19 years ago, I last bought a FIFA game. Um, Yeah, I would say it. Well, I think the graphics are going to be the same. The gameplay is going to be the same. It just doesn't have the FIFA logo on it. That's basically it. They still have access to the clubs. They still have access to that. But they contractually split. Honestly, I don't care. It's a video game. EA games and EA Sports, I really don't buy. I will say this: just because I haven't, bought an Xbox game or PlayStation game, just a video game in a while. Um, I think for me, eh, it's the cost. It's not that I don't like, gaming, um, but it's more the cost, um, and that's basically it. Although losing interest in football, rugby, and cricket is an opportunity for. Yes, it is. It is. I do agree with that. I'm more passionate about just a fewer sports now. So when the rugby league season finishes in October, I'm going to be a bit depressed for a few months. We've got some internationals coming up at the end of the season. Tonga are playing England in a three-game series, which is going to be fun. And I will be watching that with some great interest. There's going to be some player movement. There's going to be some coaching movement, I believe. But for me, yeah, I've reached a point now where I'm a bit. There's only a couple of sports that I'm really truly passionate about, um, and other sports, I think massive change needs to occur. But I think the direction we're heading in certain sports is quite concerning. And I haven't even mentioned the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia and their involvement in a variety of sports in the last few years, which all started with the Newcastle United takeover, ironically. That was their gateway into professional sport. I'm not against a nation using its sovereign wealth fund to invest in other economies around the world, in privately held entities like sports clubs. But I am concerned, however, with the political side of things, where this is a deliberate policy by the Saudi government, which is not a very democratic government, regardless of how Saudi Arabia makes money, which is in oil and gas extraction, but primarily the Saudi government is not really a democratic government. It is an absolute monarchy. It's basically a dictatorship with a basically headed with by a royal family, basically. So it's basically a semi-military dictatorship. Um, if Norway, with their sovereign wealth fund, was to invest, I think there'll be no complaints from anyone. Norway's got a similar, oil and gas-based sovereign wealth fund, which they've invested really, really wisely, both domestically and internationally, for their citizens. Saudi Arabia, however, is very aggressively following this policy, which is backed by their Ministry of Transport, Ministry of Tourism, and Overseas Development, to buy into sports and entertainment and tourism. They've really gone hard. Same with Qatar, same with the UAE, same with all the Arab Gulf nations, apart from Yemen, because Yemen's in a civil war. But all the other more stable Gulf nations for about 20 years now. It started with Bahrain and Qatar with the motorsport. Then the UAE, Dubai got involved. The one that's really the one that isn't aggressively using its public funds like this, which sovereign wealth funds, is Oman. Oman is one of the few Gulf countries that I think hasn't really aggressively gone after the Western sporting and entertainment industries, the service industries, um, and they have a better human rights record than the rest of the Gulf states. I'm going to put that out there. I think a lot of the backlash against, especially Saudi Arabia and to a certain extent Qatar, is what happened in Turkey with that journalist. Because no one was complaining when Man City were bought by basically the one of the Emirates from the UAE, and no one really complained about PSG, to be honest, if I remember correctly. But suddenly Newcastle United, it's how they've also destabilised the finances of sport and the governance of sport. Um, because yeah, it's destabilised the established order, and there's question marks over money laundering as well, and a lot of other issues. Um, am I making milestones by the day? The last week or so, I've already been. I think the heat has had an impact. I've had some issues away from work as well. The heat is, and humidity has had an impact on my health a little bit. I have been struggling more this year than last year, ironically, with the heat humidity. It's not been pleasant. People go, "Oh, it's sunny outside. You must enjoy working outside." Yeah, try wearing heavy high vis gear for 8 to 10 hours a day, 30 plus degree heat on multiple days with a 80% humidity, and then I will, um, yeah, then you can debate and say it's lovely because it really isn't. So the milestones is I haven't collapsed again. Yeah, I had a heat stroke the other day. It was horrible. So work's been a bit of a knackering experience, which has impacted the amount of content that I've been putting up. Because when I get in, some days I am really not feeling well, and I've just got to lie down. It's not pleasant, I can assure you. Um, yeah, they are trying. They're investing again. If this was Norway using their sovereign wealth fund, or I don't know, one of the other oil producing nations or resource rich nations that have made a lot of money off resource extraction, uh, to it, like Canada has got a lot of resources, South Africa. If this was one of the other nations using a sovereign wealth fund to diversify their economy and also invest, would we be complaining? I think South Africa may have some complaints because there's corruption and human rights abuses historically in South Africa, although South Africa is a different country now than what it was, let's say, in the 80s. But there are a lot of countries around the world that have sovereign wealth funds, and they're wishing to diversify or invest in private equity and things like that. So I think it's become more of a social, champagne socialist complaining moment because people weren't complaining when Man City were bought or PSG were purchased by their current owners. And even I remember when Chelsea were purchased by Abramovich, there wasn't a lot of complaints then. Um, it's a champagne socialist moment. It's so some white middle class people who want to be offended on behalf of others um, have their moment because they must lead really boring fucking lives. But at the same time, I do have my own concerns with what these Arab nations, these Gulf states, are doing, whilst they are still committing human rights abuses. And also, they can hold the world hostage for oil and gas prices. They can just decide not to produce any oil and gas for a few days, and we all suffer as a result financially. So, because they have such a cartel over energy, the energy industry with resource extraction, they can just turn the taps off whenever they want, and suddenly we're paying increased fuel bills to heat our homes, fuel our vehicles, and keep our businesses running. We saw it in the 70s twice with two oil prices. Yeah, so this has turned to a little bit more of a political and economic debate. So when you have a monopoly on a certain commodity, so it's like South Africa with diamonds and gold, for example, those industries that rely on those um, resources as part of the components of making products. So when people think of gold and diamonds, they think jewelry. No, no, no. Diamonds can be used in heavy machinery like cutting tools. Gold is used for electric conductors in microchips. So if South Africa wanted to, they could turn the taps off for the diamond and gold industry. They don't. We're not going to produce any. We're going to stop exporting over a row over how much those commodities cost, and suddenly the knock-on impacts in other industries which employ people impact. So I don't think there'll be the backlash if the Norwegian Public Investment Fund So the Norwegian government said we want to diversify our economy going forward and then provide for our, and invest. I don't think so. Because Norway doesn't have a catalogue of human rights abuses um, since World War II against their government's name and in the name of their head of state. Norway is one of the happiest countries in the world with one of the highest standards of living. I don't think there'll be the complaints there. Would I complain if Blackburn were taken? We've already got the Venkis in charge, and India's got a lot of social and economic ills that it's not confronting right now, and there are ongoing insurgencies. There's things going on in India that don't get reported in the Western media. Going to tell you that for a fact for right now. A lot of Blackburn fans aren't happy with the current ownership. And it's not just overseas owners. I mean, look. Ask Blackpool fans about the Oyston family. Look at Derby County. It doesn't matter. Mike Ashley with Newcastle. Um, it all circles back to football doesn't care or sport doesn't care where the money comes from, as long as the money keeps rolling in. Um, so we can circle that into gambling advertising in sport and formerly tobacco advertising in sport. Sport does not care or does not care where the investment and the money comes from, unless the money just as long as the money keeps coming in and everyone's happy. Um, Suddenly, some of these sports governing bodies are, "Oh, do we continue to chase the Arab money? Do we chase the Russian money with Abramovich and others for 2 3 decades following the collapse of communism? Now that's naughty. We can't touch that. Let's go to the Arab money now. Until that becomes naughty, we can't touch that. Then we circle back to the US money, and some of these US businessmen have linked to organised crime. Do we touch that? It starts becoming ridiculous. Um, it does. No, it isn't often that you hear me swear these days, because monetization is important, and I want to do this as a full-time job, and therefore not do my crappy day job anymore, because it's underpaid. I love working outdoors, and I love a lot of people that I work with, but the industry I work in is chronically underfunded and underpaid. Chronically, there's a lot of labour unrest within the industry that I work in, across the board, across the world. So. Um, I don't think I look. I look. If we had a sovereign wealth fund that isn't King Charles, that isn't the royal family, but if we had a sovereign wealth fund like Norway and like some of these Gulf states, and we were to then invest some of that money in service industries such as sport and entertainment, I'm not sure that there would be the backlash necessarily. Um, Nobody in here is interested in the under 21s. I the thing is, I occasionally be flicking through on YouTube because there's some great live streams of sport around the world, or I'll be flicking through on the NRL website, and there might be. Yeah, I do occasionally watch some of the Jersey Flegg and New South Wales and Queensland Cup games in the NRL whilst I'm waiting for the main day's play to kick off because they play their games before the NRL games. They'll double head. Um, I think I was watching a trial match of the women's NRLW because their season kicks off in a few weeks. I occasionally watch, but I think at the same time they don't get the same interest from fans. But team scouts, both of club and international teams, they'll be there in force. They will really be watching to see how these players are developing, and then this is where scouts are there from rival clubs and countries. And yeah, some of these players do show a lot of, but I don't put a lot of. I'm not say stock, but I'm less interested in the under 18s, under 21s than at senior level because they're playing against other age range. When you're at senior level, you might have senior pros who are in their late 30s, early 40s. Like Buffon, for example, is playing in right now, was still playing. Ibrahimovic has recently retired. Some of their teammates 20 years younger than them. That's when you really get to see when a veteran player, when you're a young player and come up against veterans and established senior players who've been doing it a while. That's the difference. So when these kids go from the reserves and the youth teams into the senior squad, that's when you start paying attention if they can hack it at senior level. But yeah, it is non-stop football or soccer. It is a bit much. It does become a little bit draining. I like the month of June and the early part of July because there's no football on normally, and suddenly now the last couple of years it is a constant 24-hour cycle, and that's another reason why I think I've fallen out of love with football a bit. There's no anticipation for next season because it's constant. Um, but no, there are some interesting players, promising players of all countries coming through at the age grades. Hello from Pittsburgh. Oh, hello, Liam. Nice of you to join us from the US of A, from the city of brotherly love. Or is that Philadelphia? That is Philadelphia. Pittsburgh is the Steel City in the Rust Belt. Same state, just down the road. Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love, and it's a damn good film as well. If you like your social history films kind of thing with Tom Hanks, Philadelphia, it's a damn good film about the AIDS epidemic and the late 80s, and if you're into your social films about that kind of era, great thing. No, it doesn't. I think the not a lot of people, but Twitter yesterday went down because they are now Twitter. Let's talk about Twitter. I no longer have a Twitter account, and I'm glad. Um, if you're a non-blue tick member, you are limited to 600 tweets you can engage with a day. And if you are a blue tick member, like 6,000. So basically, Twitter was down yesterday and really, really slow, and there was a lot of people complained about how basically Elon Musk is basically asset stripping a company to make money, basically, because he can use it as a tax write-off. Elon Musk is just a Bond villain. As in, if Philadelphia is known as the city of love, and yet it has an aggressive. Yeah, that's the irony. But no, it's where the founding fathers basically, I believe, signed the Declaration of Independence, if I'm not mistaken. And for a brief period, it was the capital of the USA. For a brief period while they were building Washington D.C. Yeah, Pennsylvania is a very important state in the US for its history, its culture, and its economic development over a very, very long period of time. Again, I've got to. I should have. There should be more boffin channels. I barely do any content on the other one at the moment. I've got to really start focusing on the second channel, do some more content. I've got some book reviews and video. I've got a whole series of if you like your railway and transportation history, I've got tons of books on that because I'm a bit of a steam train nerd. And so when we talk about national, I've got to do videos on the other channel, otherwise I'm going to distract myself. But I collect books. I've got a few. I've got a book about the colonisation of Africa. I've got a book about the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, which is basically the English Civil War and related conflicts and the wars of religion, which I'm halfway through, which is very interesting. I've got to the book when King Charles is just about to arrest the 5 members of Parliament. That's really interesting, which ultimately lead following events in the century following ultimately leads to the US Declaration of Independence. So there we go. Pittsburgh's a really cool city for sports. Hockey, football are pretty good. Basically slacking, but they've had their days. Um, yeah, it's not often we get US subscribers. I've got a handful of US subscribers who are quite active on the channel in chat and in comment sections and in viewership. To be fair, a lot of the growth in the channel has come from Australia and America. They're consistently um, watching the content and engaging with the content. So outside of the UK, a lot of the growth has been definitely being driven by the United States. But it's very interesting how the sporting cultures are completely different between North America and Europe, completely different. And I find a lot of the viewers when I do my football club histories or soccer club histories, should I say, for the North American audience, are from the US and Canada. A lot of when I do club history videos, team history videos on the teams, when they're founded, their successes, their failures, trophy cabinet, that kind of thing. Um, a lot of the viewers, ironically, apart from let's say viewers from that town or that city where the club is based, come from the US. The United fan base in the US is not, I wouldn't say educated, I think very keen to learn. I think that's very interesting. Very, very keen to learn about the sporting culture in Europe. Um, very, very keen to understand, and they're really surprised about some of the clubs that used to be successful 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. The next Italian club I'm going to do are one of the most successful clubs in Italian league history, yet they haven't won a trophy since the 70s. Maybe go, what? I'm not going to give it away because that will ruin it. But people are going to be stunned with how successful this one particular club is in their early days. Um, No, Pittsburgh. Yeah, Pittsburgh is a really cool city in the sense of its sporting pedigree in the US. I mean, obviously the Penguins have won 5 Stanley Cups, all in my lifetime. My favourite NHL player of all time played for the Penguins for a large chunk of his career. I used to have a mullet like this with Jeremy. I actually had the Yager mullet going at 3 different stages in this channel's existence. I've grown the Yager mullet, and you can see that on my videos. Um, my favourite jersey that I own is a Yager jersey, even though it's Washington Capitals. But the fact he's even still playing. I mean, Christ, he started professional hockey the year I was born. Yeah. So Jeremy Yager is just he's at this point he's a cult hero. He's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. It's a shame he didn't play his entire. He hasn't played his entire career in the NHL because that would have been ridiculous. But yeah, Jeremy Yager is just God. Um, uh, the Pittsburgh Steelers. A friend of mine, my friend Ollie, is a Steelers fan. For I like to say I like to call fans tragics. If that makes sense because there's going to be periods where the team isn't very good and you're long suffering, like New York Mets fans. So if you may notice one of my moderators, Dan Hobbs. He was an NCAA baseball player. He's a Mets fan. He currently lives in Sacramento. He works for Sacramento FC in the I think the North American Soccer League. I think it is, which is the level below the MLS in their sales department. Um, he had to give up baseball to an elbow injury. He's a Mets fan. He calls himself a Mets tragic. Apparently, I've got to go easy on them when I ever get round to doing videos on the New York Mets. But it's basically the New York Mets, for example, is just a gateway to alcoholism and depression. Same with most New York franchises, I think. If you're an Islanders fan in the NHL, that is a gateway to therapy. If you're a Rangers fan, they've underachieved a lot, considering they are one of the wealthiest sports franchises in North America for value. They play the most iconic building, which is Madison Square Garden. Might drop that there. I want to go see Madison Square Garden. It's on my bucket list. It is. New York City itself isn't, but Madison Square Garden is weird. That. Have you followed the England and the Ashes? No. Uh, Again, cricket's one of those sports where I'm very, very passionate about it, but I have concerns in the direction the sport is going. I have been to test matches. I have played it at school. I've got friends who still play the sport now at an amateur community level and are quite passionate. Um, but it's a sport where I've lost touch with it in a sense. I don't feel as connected with it in a sense, and I think the direction sport's taken since the 2005 Ashes win is the wrong direction. Because the ECB, like a lot of sports, chase the money. It's like Alan Stanford when he came in with that $20 million game, and we found out he was a massive, massive fraudster, which he was running a frigging Ponzi scheme and went to prison and cost a lot of people a lot of money and embarrassed the ECB and the West Indies Cricket Board royally and completely embarrassed a lot of administrators. Yeah, cricket, much like football, soccer, rugby union, doesn't really care where the money's coming from as long as the money comes in. And when you find out it's dirty money or dodgy money or there's corruption or sleaze behind it, they suddenly act all surprised. They knew all along. What would I say is the biggest difference between US or North American, because I follow a lot of Canadian teams as well, sport and culture in Europe is the franchise dynamic and the atmosphere inside arenas and stadiums. Uh, I think in North America, you're going to be shocked when the World Cup comes around with how the European and South American fans, their atmosphere that they're going to bring, the African fans. It is 100%. It's like going to war. I know in Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh, um, the fans can get on the back of their teams and start, getting, you know, throwing plastic beer cups. No, no, you haven't seen European football. Yeah, it's when you've got fans or ultras or hooligans go to games with machetes and axes down their trousers, and they have pitch battles in the streets for 16 hours. That's a different level of yeah. When you're the away team and you come out and you've just got a wall of 10,000 flares and you're going. It's basically going to war. It's a different. It's just a completely different culture. I don't know how to describe it, but I think the noise, the atmosphere, sometimes the sporting humour with some of the chants we come up with. Um, yeah, it's a completely different. I mean, some of the sledging between the Australian and English fans at the Ashes. I mean, Steve Smith, obviously, the ball tampering scandal of 4 or 5 years ago. The English fans at Edgbaston the other day were chanting, "We saw you cry on the telly. We saw you cry," and they really ripped into him. And I think he was like, "Okay, yeah, there's a bit of tongue-in-cheek humour. It's not nasty humour, but it's pushing the boundaries of acceptable daytime viewing." They were football chanting basically at a cricket ground. Barmy Army is brilliant. Don't know what the Barmy Army is. Check them out. It actually is not a cricketing. Is it a cricketing? Was it a cricketing or a rugby league? I think it was actually due to rugby league. 1987. There was a Great Britain tour to Australia where they were getting slaughtered in every game, and the fans just stayed on the drink, kept chanting, and kept going. And an Australian journalist basically said they really are a barmy army, as in these people are insane. They're getting battered on the field. And then the cricketing team, there was an Ashes series. Phil Tufnell, I've got a couple of Phil Tufnell's books, which are really hilarious to read as well. Some of the stuff in there I can't repeat on camera for a family audience. Some of the uh, stories in there are hilarious. There's one I will discuss, which is just you couldn't get away with now, but it's quite funny. But he mentions the Barmy Army. So Liam, if you don't know what the Barmy Army is, it's basically Great Britain or English travelling support abroad with rugby union, rugby league, and cricket. And you can become a member. You can buy merch. They sell merchandise. It's like the Aussie. Some of the Aussie fans will dress up with inflatable kangaroos and bright yellow. The Aussies have their own version of the Barmy Army. There's the travelling Yargers in the NHL or in ice hockey, who every team he plays for, a new member joins. There's the travelling Yargers. They're a small little group of very dedicated ice hockey fans from every city that the Army Yargers played in. It started off It actually started off in Pittsburgh, um, and then every team he moved to, like Washington, New York, Calgary, uh, Miami, Florida. I'm trying to think how yeah, they've even got fans from Eastern Europe in the KHL, and obviously Kladno, where he currently is team owner and part-time player. Um, the travelling Yargers, so it's just fantastic. Um, and they go to games. There's a few of these travelling fan groups that in international tournaments when their nation's playing or a certain player's playing, they travel. It's funny. But the Barmy Army starts in the late 80s with rugby league, with the Great Britain tour of Australia where they get slaughtered. It then becomes the cricketing arm of England when they travel abroad. It's just they are something else. There's full-time members whose job is to organise events, sell merchandise, social media, mainstream media, do all that kind of stuff. Just fantastic, fantastic. So yeah, I think the atmosphere and the club ownership, team ownerships are the biggest difference. You have the franchise model, and we have the club community model and the fan atmosphere is just something. It's just something completely different. Is Flintoff the worst cricketer? I think Flintoff is the worst sportsman I've ever met, alongside Alan Pardew for their how they come across. Um, when Alan Pardew was still playing for Palace, or towards the end of his Palace career, and Steve Coppell in the early days of his managerial career, I've met them. They don't come across as particularly nice individuals. Um, USA on home soil, good chance of winning the FIFA World Cup. Yes and no. They're a much better side than what they were in the 1990s when they first hosted. Things have evolved so much. The player base has grown, the fan base has grown, the money in the game, the stability in the game for the first time in history of the sport in North America is finally there. The TV deal is better than what it was before. Overseas investment, yes, we've got people from our side of the pond, so to speak, investing in David Beckham and others, for example, buying into the MLS. Um, I don't think the MLS is taken as seriously as I think it should be. Um, but yeah, I think they've got a good chance of going far. Same with the Canadians. I think the Canadians, okay, no, last World Cup was a dip in the toe for them. They've got a good development program, both men and women. The women's team are one of the best in the world. Um, so I think Canada and the US are trending in the right direction in both the men's and women's games. Mexico, yeah, the last World Cup was poor, but I think the MLS is an underestimated league. But when you look at participation at all levels, from grassroots and youth all the way to senior, the sport has overtaken ice hockey and it's about to overtake baseball in the US. I think it's overtaken Canadian football in Canada. So participation levels have gone through the roof. Accessibility means it's easier just to set up a team. Um, let's say you've got a couple of parents at the local middle school or high school, and they go right. Let's club together. Let's get a team out there. You can do it. Whereas with American football and ice hockey, it costs more money for the equipment, for uniforms like the helmets, the pads, the sticks, the skates, the football shin pads, football boots or cleats. I don't know why the Americans call them cleats. We call them football boots. I really don't understand why they call them that. We just call them boots or football boots. Um, um, I don't know where the American word for cleat came from, but cleats is what you put on horses. I remember from a military standpoint, you can get cleats on horses, but that's um, interesting one. But no, um, I think the MLS is underestimated as a league by the European media. I think they really underestimate some of the quality that's in there, and it's quite entertaining because it's what I would call a purer form of the sport. Um, the players aren't paid massive money. There are very few marquee players for the salary cap. So Messi going, okay, it's similar to your Ibrahimovic or your David Beckham. When they go to the league, raises the profile. Um, but what is interesting with Ibrahimovic and Beckham, they prolong their careers by going to the MLS. So they go for a short stint to the MLS and then they go back to Europe and prolong their careers and want further silverware. Messi, I think he's going to retire in the MLS. That's the difference. It would be nice for the US to get to the last eight. I think the US and Canada could both get to the knockout stage. So let's just say that. I think they're trending in the right direction, and the Canadian women's team are fantastic as well. I think they've overtaken the US personally, in my opinion. I don't think the US are going to retain their World Cup title in Australia and New Zealand this year when it comes to the women's game. Um, Mexico, the bridesmaids, the last 16, only when they host. That is the only time they get to the later knockout stages when they're hosting. So 1970, 86, and in 2020, they never get past the quarterfinals. And the only time they make the quarterfinals is when they're hosting. Right, the top five sports British people watch. Oh, God. Well, obviously football. I would say football, rugby union, and cricket dominate our viewing habits for record viewership of all time. Football, cricket, and rugby union are up there. Um, and then I think motorsport, the various forms of motorsport, if you were to clump them together, like F1, MotoGP, superbikes, rallying, touring cars, they get some pretty decent viewership figures. If you clump them all together, they actually get some pretty good, decent historically as well. Um, Rugby league is more regional uh, in the north of England, which limits the viewership. Although we have got obviously the London Broncos and London Scholars in the southeast, and you've got the Cornish Rugby League in the southwest. But that limited fan bases in the south. I think that's where the RFL have really mucked up the governance of the game and growing the game. But the Challenge Cup finals always played in London, so and I've always loved watching the Challenge Cup final. And admittedly, I haven't watched any of the Challenge apart from the first and second round of the Challenge Cup this year. I haven't watched any of the later stages. I will be watching the final though, because it's the Challenge Cup final. So it's an institution not only on this channel but in my life. Um, no, they've changed the group stage format again. They're not going to do the group of three. They've changed the group structure again because there was backlash. FIFA realised, oh, there will be match fixing. Oh, more corruption. We can't have that. How many people play rugby league in Wales? I don't know. Is the answer. I think they've reduced the number of groups and increased the group sizes for the next World Cup. But again, we're too far out to discuss. We haven't even fully qualified for the Euros yet. We're too far out to discuss the World Cup in 3 years' time. Let's not worry about it until we actually get there. Let's get the Euros out of the way next year first. That's going to be the interesting one. How many people play rugby league in Wales? I could not tell you. Could not tell you. Most of the Welsh internationals actually uh, play in England, so there's that. 24 teams will not stay. How do you mean by that question? What the format for they were going to go for the 3-team groups, and that was basically match fixing anonymous. Basically, would have been the answer there. The likelihood of that being so corrupted would have been. Um, uh, oh, the Euros. I think it expands to 32 at some point. It has to. Fans are not happy with the best third place teams. The way it's structured now, it doesn't. It never worked. It didn't work at the World Cup. It's not working for the Euros. You either expand it or contract it. I don't think they can stay at 24. Personally, I don't. It doesn't work. 24 teams doesn't work as a tournament format unless you change the group structure again. Um, so yeah, it doesn't work. Even with the groups of 3, there is a way you could do it where um, is 32 teams ridiculous for the Euros? Unless you combine the Euros with like Africa or some of the Asian nations, let's say from the Gulf states, or because we've got Turkey and Israel in there for political reasons. Yeah. Unless they start adding, well, we've got Azerbaijan. They're technically, and Armenia and Georgia. They're technically Asian nations as well. We might as well just go. We've got Kazakhstan in there. They're an Asiatic nation. I think Uzbekistan. I think could join UEFA. Um, I honestly do think they will go to 32 teams, and then that changes, and then you'll have joint Euros and World Cup qualifying groups for both tournaments, rather than 2 separate bouts of qualification for the international tournaments. I think it's the way it's going to go. We've already got the Nations League, which I think devalues qualification. I think for World Cups and Euros. So yeah, I think the Asian Confederation is going to be split at some point into um, different groupings, like with Arabia, the Arabian and the Gulf states. I mean, look, we've already got some Asian nations playing in UEFA anyway for political reasons, like Kazakhstan, Turkey, and Israel. So I can see maybe some of the North African nations like Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and maybe Egypt joining um, uh, the Euros. Partly because they're too good for the rest of Africa, I think, on a consistent level, and most of their players play in Europe anyway. Um, so I don't know. Could we get the North American nations basically playing in the Euros? I think that would make sense. Do I agree with what having 3 Asian nations already as part of UEFA? Forget the politics. Uh, I mean, the fact that Turkey's football clubs have always been part of the European, club scene when it comes to the World Cup, Winners' Cup, Champions League, Europa League kind of thing. They've won European silverware, partly because I think a third of Turkey's population is technically in Europe because of Istanbul and the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles and all that. There is geographically a bit of Turkey in Europe. Um, Kazakhstan, obviously being a former member of the Soviet Union, and yeah, geopolitics. In regards to Israel, I think we've got to look at the various confederations and decide what we do going forwards. In regards to the Euros next year, I don't like the current format. 32 was good for the World Cup for a long time until they obviously want to expand to the next World Cup. The 2014 format was proven not to work at the World Cup in years past. So either you contract it, which means you make less money, which is what UEFA don't want, because it's money. Remember, money, or you expand. And I think 32 teams is a nice, healthy number. It just means qualification. We're going to get more nations playing in the Euros, which I ultimately don't think is a bad thing. It means more players get that exposure. 20-team tournament, 4 groups of 5. But then you have to have a second round group stage, which we had at the World Cup and did not work. Where we have another round of going through. I don't know. There is no perfect. I will say this: there is no perfect way to do a tournament. There are preferred ways. There is no perfect way. There is no perfect sporting system. There's no perfect league. There's no perfect relegation promotion. There's no perfect playoff system. There's no playoff seeding. Nothing is perfect. We're always going to critique. I said that in my Major League Baseball review video. Was it yesterday? Was it today? I think it was yesterday when I did the 2023 London Series review. I basically stated that there is no perfect sporting event, there is no perfect sporting structure, there is no perfect system. There's always going to be someone critiquing something. I mean, I had a few criticisms of the Major League Baseball London Series in 2019, and I still have them in 2023. There is no perfect system. There is no perfect international tournament system, like a round robin group stage. No perfect system. There is no perfect promotion relegation system. We've discussed that before. There's no perfect franchise system. There's no perfect salary cap system. There's no perfect, playoff structure. There's always people saying, well, we can do it this way, we can do it that way, we can structure it like this, structure it like that. This is the format. I mean, look, I'll be in 2 months' time when it comes to NRL finals. We'll be discussing, should the top 4 teams, if they win their opening game, get the second week off, or should they have to do similar to the bottom 4 if they were to, there is no perfect system. Apart from the Olympics or Commonwealth Games, where can you watch sports like ice hockey or table tennis? Are we talking? I'm assuming we're talking field hockey here and table tennis. Yeah, I don't know. Is the answer. I don't follow every sport religiously. There's not enough time in the day. I mean, I would have to have multiple screens going and pay for several different internet feeds, which would be ridiculous. I would literally have to turn my apartment into a sports studio with monitors all over the place, and I think I'd overload the electrics and probably go mad. I would need an assistant. I honestly, to that answer, I don't know. I don't know where, apart from the Olympics and Commonwealths and there are some World Championships that get broadcast with national broadcasters where they get the rights. So track and field athletics, for example, cycling. We've seen it with various Olympic and Commonwealth sports that also have World Championships in their cycle. Also get broadcasting rights because they're affiliated with the IOC's Olympic sports with host broadcasters like let's say the BBC. Because they're affiliated with the IOC's Olympic sports with host broadcasters like let's say the BBC, for example, or one of the other free-to-air broadcasters in this country, or with ESPN in North America, and NBC, for example. I would watch more sports, but I don't have the means to do it. Wouldn't watch it religiously, just casual. I think there is a point with the 24-hour kind of media cycle, 24/7 media cycle, where you get saturated and you just get burnt out. I mean, I just, even though I want to do this full time and I want to make a living off this platform, I couldn't do it every day at the moment. It's called work-life balance. I would never go outside if I would watch every single major sporting event. I would need monitors all over my apartment. I would have to dedicate every waking hour to sport, which means I would actually have to cover less sport. If I was to do that, I would actually have to reduce the sports that I follow and focus on a handful of leagues. And I have to go, right, okay, I'm going to have to stop following this league. I'm going to have to do less content on that sport. I'm not going to be able to watch, let's say, the motorsport every every weekend, where I dip in and out of which, you know, I've been watching the European Truck Racing Series, obviously the World Endurance Championship, the European Le Mans series as well. Love watching them. They're great to watch. Because I like my endurance racing, I would have to stop watching the NRL, for example, watch that less. So I would have to then focus on a particular sport. Go, right, I'm going to focus on rugby league. I'm going to focus on sort of NHL. I would have to go, right. I'm going to have to focus more on one. I wouldn't want to do that. Wouldn't want to do that. So I have to be a little bit more casual with some sports, so I can cover more sport. Basketball, can't get into it. Neither can I. I played it at school. Never enjoyed playing it. It's probably one of the reasons why I can't get into it, because I didn't enjoy playing it. I'm not a look. As I said, look, I'm not a massive baseball fan, but I've done a lot of baseball content because of the London series since 2019, and the investment they're putting in. And it'll be really dopey of me not to cover it, because there's going to be a surge of interest here in the UK, and of course the North Americans are going to see how these games pan out, because it's Major League Baseball. Um, I could it be it's too end to end? I think some of the most interesting sports. I mean, this is why I love ice hockey, because it's so end to end, and it's one of the fastest sports in the world. I mean, no, I've watched some rugby league matches in the. I've watched some NRL games which are very open end to end, which are very low scoring. I don't think it's the high scoring nature. I don't think it's just for me. There's that lack of physical contact, really. Um, if you're the team in possession, the defending team can't just hammer you. I think that's what I like. This is why I like watching ice hockey and rugby league is because if you're the defending team, you get a batter the attacker, or if the attacker's quite powerful, he can just roll over a defender. It's that gladiatorial aspect of the combat. And saying that, as a kid, I had obviously with Space Jam and Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls, and there was a fair bit of interest when I was a kid in the 90s from a lot of people, because of how the NBA decided to market themselves using, Dennis Rodman and Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson, for example. They had some big superstars, and it wasn't just the Chicago Bulls that were the super. I mean, you had the Boston Celtics, still do. They in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a massive group of players across the league that really were very marketable with how they came across. How they presented themselves to them. Some of the they really, until the late 80s, the NBA was terrible at selling itself to the domestic and overseas audience. The NHL was a bigger league. Suddenly, the late 80s happened. Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Dennis Rodman, all these players start coming, get drafted, start playing, they start winning titles. And then Space Jam, they make Space Jam in the mid 90s, and the rest is history. And now some of the teams are worth billions of dollars. Some of the contracts are worth tens of millions of dollars. So the sport has exploded in its revenue streams and everything. They made a Space Jam too, but that's okay. Um, um, would I say YouTube algorithm is random? Yes. Again, I've had the same thing where some of my older content is still getting views 4 or 5 years after I did it. Some of my newer content, recently, I see once a month, once every month or every 2 months, I've got one video that explodes, and then view counts drop off again. So yes, I do think the algorithm is completely random, doesn't work, and YouTube deny that's the case. They push the more suggested videos. No. I while obviously I've got a few less subscribers than you. I know you've got the extra few hundred more subscribers, and you are dedicated to that one particular sport, which I think focuses that algorithm. And obviously, what's right? Let's just say, because I'm a multi-sport kind of that umbrella, I cover a lot of sports that spreads the interest. So I might have some viewers who are just focused on rugby league, or some viewers who just like Major League Baseball, or some viewers that like the sports history aspect, or maybe a massive sports scandal. They're just following the news cycle of things. Whereas you obviously focus on that one particular sport, so therefore you've got a more dedicated bang. TikTok is just dodgy as hell. Um, TikTok is not a platform that I want to use. Uh, but the YouTube Shorts don't work. Just going to put that out there. And then when you do start earning money, they earn you pennies. But no, I because I cover multiple sports, I'm going to have subscribers and viewers that aren't interested in rugby league. I'm going to have subscribers and viewers that aren't interested in association football, the North American leagues, rugby, and whatever it may be. They're going to be more interested, let's say, in the Six Nations. My Six Nations videos always do well. Always do well. The Six Nations videos and match reviews and anything to do with rugby union, my rugby union content always does well. Always. It's never not done well, which I find really weird. Really weird, but I'm actually looking forward to this year's World Cup because I think that's where the channel's going to explode again. My rugby league content always does well, always has done. Even though we have it's a very niche sport in the UK, and to a certain extent, parts of Australia don't watch it. It's more AFL. Yeah, so YouTube Shorts definitely don't work, but the YouTube claim they don't. Like there's obviously I follow the hockey guy, and he goes the YouTube Shorts don't earn it; they earn him a few cents on the dollar, literally. For doing a short which may last 50 seconds, it might earn him 2 cents. Doesn't get it's a flaw. They're just trying to publicly do it to take on TikTok and Instagram. It's not working. Um, Unless you do the word the title in a certain way, so clickbait it, you might suddenly get bang. What? And then people are watching. Um, but some of my weather videos have actually done quite well. So when there's a thunderstorm or heavy snow, people actually watch them. People actually watch them because that's a talking point. Oh my god, have you seen the blizzard? Have you seen the thunderstorm? Have you seen the flooding? Have you seen whatever? Um, I haven't gained many subscribers out of my shorts at all, really. Um, but shorter videos seem to do quite well when you. But then again, my sport history videos do quite well. View count wise, some of them have done really well, some not so much. I think it depends on the team that I'm covering. But I've gained a lot of subscribers and channel growth because of club history. So my week off is going to be quite interesting. There's going to be a lot of content going up. The weather buffing. I just put weather videos on both channels. I started putting the weather videos on the other channel, and I realised because I've already got a smaller audience on that channel, I'm not growing it. So I went back to putting it on this channel, and I've gained subscribers with the weather videos on this channel because I've already, got that audience there, and people might go, "Oh Christ!" Because some of my subscribers go, "Oh, thank God, it's not all sport. The guy has a life." And yes, I do have a life. I do go out and explore. I've got on the other channel though, I did used to do urban exploring. I used to find abandoned houses and go out in the woods and find like abandoned cars and vehicles and exposed archaeology. I think one of them. No, you don't want to see what um, I do for cooking. It's microwave and some ingredients in a bowl, stir it together, heat it up, and now looks tasty. Honestly, yeah, the strawberries were actually my neighbour. He was the one growing them. I was the one looking after them when he was on holiday, and they came up really well. So it just proves that even if you are a complete novice, you can grow your own fruit and vegetables. You don't have to do a lot. It's not as difficult. Some fruits and some vegetables you do have to really look after. Strawberries though, if you find a wild strawberry plant or a wild black blueberry plant or blackberry plant, they don't take a lot of maintenance. They actually look after themselves. They are very mint. My mint plants are growing fantastically. They don't take a lot of maintenance really. And come August, September, I'll be making a lot of mint tea. You can make your own tea. You can make your own, mint to put in your cooking. So they some plants. I mean, and also it's cheaper than going to the supermarket or the farmer's market. You know, to because I do have a history channel. Yes, it's just the history buff, and haven't posted content on there for a while. But I've got a week off work booked. Well, you call it vacation, I call it holiday. Not next week, the week after. So I'll be going up to the River Thames. A few of my friends live by the River Thames, and we'll be doing some exploring for a couple of days. I think we might be camping by the river. I don't know. I might just go up for the day. I might go up for a couple of days, have a barbecue and all that. Depends on the weather, and depends on if we have any more rail strikes, because there's going to be some more transport disruption, because the trade unions, the government, and the rail companies are all at war with each other, and so it's bit of yeah. Yeah, it costs money. Money is something I don't have a lot of, and I'm not getting the train to Wales because I'll be skint and won't be able to do anything. But I do have a history channel. I haven't posted content for a little while, but I do have some book reviews that I'm going to do at some point, and I've got to do some more history videos when it comes to. I also do current affairs on there, but I haven't done that for a while. Uh, do I prefer the sports channel? Well, the sports channel is the original channel. This is the original channel, and sport um, seems to be more popular than discussing. I try. I what when I do my history videos, when I do, like, let's say, looking, I've got a kings and queens playlist, which is really entertaining, because we're going back hundreds of years to look at, let's say, Edward the First, for example, of England, or I don't know. Let's have a look at you know Charles the Bold. He was Duke of Burgundy, for example. The Hundreds Years' War. That kind of thing. Really interesting, because that's happened a long time ago. But more modern politics, very, very divisive. So I look at really old history, and go, this is stuff that's happened, and just key moments. I don't do every single the History Channel. I started that in 2018 in the summer holidays, because one of my cousins, she was like, "Oh, my kids have got some projects to do in the school holidays for the next school year." I said, "Ah, I'll do it." And I realised very, very quickly that the area of England that I live in, west of London, is actually very, very historical, going back to the Iron Age, Bronze Age. We've got some Bronze Age and Iron Age uh, um, uh, monuments, basically, that are scheduled monuments that you can't build on. And sort of like the Native American reservations, where they find the old burial mounds, and they find the old flint tools and things like that. We've got things going back to that period, and then obviously metalworking, the Iron Age Celts, and the Roman invasion, and then the Saxons and Vikings, and then the Norman invasion, and then obviously the modern period for even World War Two. There's a lot of stuff around here with air bases and training camps, and you can find all sorts. And the area of the country I live in has got a lot more history than people realise, of significance to the direction world history goes in. So there is a lot of. I mean, the area I live in now. I mean, Henry VIII meets Catherine of Aragon when his brother Arthur is still alive. Literally, what, a mile down the road from where I live, is their first recorded meeting. When his older brother's still alive before his brother dies. When his brother's Prince of Wales and he's just a secondary prince. Um, People don't realise that. Where my mum lives up the road, Catherine of Aragon was under house arrest during their divorce proceedings. There's a stately home which is a short distance from where I used to live, in the next town over, or the next district, but near where I used to live, which is 20-minute walk or a 2-minute drive from my mum's house. Which I've ridden when I used to have my motorbike, my moped, scooter, with 125 6-seater engine. Used to ride past it every day on the way to work, and ride back past it every day on the way home from work for years. Um, um, and There's a lot of history here that's changed the course of our religious history, our political history, the direction that um, England, and Scotland and Wales and Ireland take, because of the Wars of Religion, which follows on the next century, and the book I'm reading, which by Peter Ackroyd, which is part of a series of books on British history. But at the moment, oh no, I'll just knock my laptop over. But at the moment, the I'm on volume 3. I haven't got volumes 1 and 2 or 4 and 5, because I'm uh, a bit of a dick. But it's my favourite period of history, which is the Renaissance, and then the early modern period, where the Three Musketeers. It's the era of the Three Musketeers. There you go. And Lady de Winter and Duke of Buckingham on the English side of things. So it's Charles the First and the Duke of Buckingham. I've got past the bit where Buckingham gets assassinated, and I'm on the bit where Duke of Stafford's been executed, and he's about to walk into Parliament to arrest John Pym and the other 4 MPs, which triggers the Civil War. Um, and then that's the War of the Three Kingdoms. So bear that in kin. It's not just the English Civil War; it's the War of the Three Kingdoms because there's civil unrest in Scotland and Ireland as well. Um, uh, right. What is about the Ashes? Um, right. Explore Wales if you get monetised maybe someday. Come to Wales, yes. More talking points with sport politics have its place. Sport and politics clash sometimes. Yeah, there are terrible bed partners. It's like a really bad set of relatives. It's not like a happy marriage. It's two uncles at a wedding getting drunk and fighting each other. That's basically how I describe sport and politics. What is about the Ashes? Great build up. Then generally Australia won quite convincingly. Because well, I don't think generally Australia won quite convincingly, but I think they've overdone it now. With they've milked that cash cow to death. They would play the Ashes too regularly. But I've discussed that before, and I'll discuss what I think should happen in cricket. I think at a later date. Don't get me started on English Welsh border. Monmouthshire was part of England for a while. There you go. Lancloud, Lanoch, is it Lanochley or Lancloudy? The middle, of both. It's there. Is it English? Is it Welsh? Is it who knows? I've always been interested in English history. Last Kingdom on Netflix got me interested in Saxons and Vikings. Basically, Vikings is a generalised term for your Danish, Nordic, and Norwegian Nordic and Swedish Vikings who also used to fight each other as well. And also the Saxons come from Denmark and northern Germany, and the Saxons are sort of another similar tribe kind of thing. So when there was a channel that said, well, how the Saxons lost to the Vikings, they didn't. Uh, they lost to each other at various points, and then they sort of merged together in the last century before the Norman conquest. The Normans were descended from Vikings and Franks, so it's just the ruling elite basically. Um, what sports were popular then? Hunting was more of a pastime than a sport. It was more of a pastime. To put food on the table if you're a noble, and it was more of a social thing than a sporting thing. It was a lot of political stuff to do with hunting. You would invite your allies over to discuss things whilst on the hunt. That's where forests come from. The word forest is actually enclosed space, which is when you find a lot of like the New Forest, half of it's heathland. It's a former royal enclosure. So when you see Epping Forest and the New Forest and things like that, the word forest is a French word forêt, which was a medieval enclosure for a nobleman or royalty to have their hunting lands and lands that they could economically exploit. And so they were protected from town and village development. Anyway, where forests come from. Woodlands are different. Forests are actually a political subdivision. Because I'm sad like that. So they obviously deer parks basically, and some of the parks in London like Regent's Park and Green Park, for example, are former royal hunting lodges. So, there you go. What sports were popular then? Hunting, jousting, and basically the tournament. So you would have the foot tournament where you would have war hammers, swords, axes, and maces. So the trial by combat kind of thing, which is sort of similar to gladiatorial combat. And then you have the joust, and then you have the archery competition. Basically, they're military training for when you actually, all these various knights and men at arms will eventually be part of your army when you go to war. So you may have lengthy periods in the kingdoms when you're at peace, when there is no conflict with another nation or civil strife. You need to keep your fighting men at arms and knights prepared for combat, and it was basically training. But yes, they were the sports of the day. The popular ones were the joust and the archery. However, the melee combat, yes, melee combat, where it was all against all, or teams of 500 kicking the shit out of each other, up to 1,000 people in teams of 500 kicking the crap out of each other in full suits of armor, with actual weapons. People did die in these competitions. There wasn't health and safety. You would get badly injured and die. Henry II of France got a lance to the eye and died a week later. in the early 1500s in a jousting accident at his birthday. So there you go. Um, yeah. So high-ranking nobles did die. So when you watch things like Game of Thrones and The Knight's Tale, and you actually see, you know, the knights flying off. So the Knight's Tale with the jousting, even though they've obviously made it a bit comical and they've added the Queen soundtrack of We Will Rock You and they actually smash into each other, that is pretty much how it is. It is that brutal when you're wearing full plate armor with chainmail and a gambeset, which is the or gambesson, which is the padded jacket underneath. It weighs a fair bit. It's basically like wearing NFL and NHL body armor together. Think of NHL goalie equipment, the weight of that, but more evenly distributed over your body. So it's not just like the leg pads and the arm guards being quite cumbersome. It's actually quite a lot of maneuverability there. But you imagine being on a horse, and even if you're left-hand dominant, you've got to joust with your right. So you might be left-hand dominant, but you're jousting with the wrong arm. It's going to fucking hurt. Um, and the lances are designed to shatter. But even then, they realised impact. You know, and however they figured it out, they realised very quickly that having a solid lance that didn't shatter would kill. You don't want to kill your knights before they go into combat. Um, so they realised the impact zone and absorption of impact and energy transfer, even back in the 1200s, they realised very quickly you want to dissipate that because oh my god, the guy's getting back, and you would. But yes, they stopped. The last jousting tournament, I believe, was written down and recorded in like the 1680s. The last tournament took place properly. The modern reenactment now is different, but now they've got the Armoured Fighting League and the Armoured Jousting tournaments now that have been modern recreations of what happened in the Middle Ages, and you have to have special weapons that are blunted, so you can't actually kill each other. People still die, but not all the time. Why did Chester receive planning permission? Planning permission. The local city or district council, that's where they got their planning permission. And part of the stadium is in England, so there is that. The French Revolution, fencing is more, the French Revolution is more fencing. And that is 150 odd years after the Wars of the Three Kingdoms and the Wars of Religion. So they messed the board. Yes, they haven't. Well, when you're drawing lines on a map, look at the Middle East and Africa. European nations have always messed borders up. Same with the US states. Some of them are weird. Yeah, I've got a mate who, a school friend of mine, he ended up going to a school in Wales. He moved. It's in Monmouthshire and near Chepstow, and yeah, it seems very English down there. Yes, the West Indies did fail. Scotland beat them in a qualifier. West Indian cricket is not what it once was. Yes, Henry VIII did carry a jousting injury, but he also had a hunting accident not long after, which also impacted him, and then he became obese and quite a fat bloke. But when he was young, I've actually seen his suit of armour from when he was 21, 22 years old. Completely different to what we see in that famous painting by Holbein when he's about to marry Anacles. The famous, he's got his beard and he's quite a big bloke. When he was young, he was ripped. He was ripped. He had a head chopping fetish. His daughter had a burning at the stake. His daughter Mary had a burn at the stake fetish, and they all. I think 10,000 people were executed during his reign. He had an execution fetish. It was a bit of a dictatorship. It wasn't the modern constitutional monarchy we have today. It was quite brutal back then. He even had some of his own advisors at their own. He had his wives, in-laws. I think five of his wives, all his English wives were related. I'm going to put that out there. All his English wives were actually related. Catherine of Aragon is the only one of his wives that wasn't related to the other five. The other five were all technically related to each other. I'm not joking. They were. Um, imagine living back then. I have my rights. No, you don't. You did until about 5 seconds ago. No, you don't. Remove the court jester, bring in his replacement. You have displeased me, off with your head. What? Fuck off. Yeah, basically, that is it was a bit of a you could be in favour one week and then something happens and suddenly you're in the tower for 6 months, or you're having your land seized and then you're sent into exile where basically you have to go to Ireland to lead a campaign against Irish rebels, for example. So you lose favour and then you lose money and pack. Yeah, no, that was a nice way of saying you're not popular right now. The bad way of saying you're not popular right now is I'm beheading you because I can, which he did. And it wasn't just Henry VIII. The Stuart kings, who were his cousins, they were pretty brutal. The French kings, the House of Valois, at the time, they were pretty brutal. They killed each other. And then you had Spain and Portugal and the Italian dukes. And yeah. My preferred time period to live in. Oh, that's that. Oh, Christ. Christ. I would say the classical era. We're talking like ancient Greece, ancient Carthage, ancient Rome, um, ancient Persia, that kind of thing. That's my favourite period of history. We're talking classical antiquity before the rise of Christianity and Islam. I would say would be my preferred time period. Honestly, um, it's my favourite period of history, but we're talking the age of myth and legend, basically. Um, but that's my. We're talking Anthony Cleopatra period of history. I think, yeah. Um, that's my favourite period of history. I wouldn't, but but we're talking all time. If we're talking in my lifetime, I would say the 90s, early 2000s were quite a fun time to be growing up in. I think the last 20 years has been an absolute shower of shit. If I'm being brutally honest, honestly, the last 15 years has definitely been a shower of shit. So basically, since I entered the workplace, we've been in we've had the 2007, 2008 to 2010 financial crash. We've had COVID, and now we've had the current economic crisis. So basically, my entire adult life has basically been a shower of shit economically and politically. But the mid '90s to the early 2000s, the mid 2000s, that 10-year period was quite nice. Um, but yeah, I only have fond memories of the summer holidays. I didn't really enjoy school, but that period was quite a pleasant period growing up as a kid. Um, it's only now as an adult that I actually knew the sacrifices um, my mum made at that time. Looking back on it, I thought I had a very idyllic kind of childhood with regular trips down the beach and to castles and museums and theme parks. Even to sporting events. But actually, looking back on it, I didn't realise how much my mum actually sacrificed at the time for me and my sister. And then eventually, my stepdad comes along and my half brother comes along, and again, in the early days there were some sacrifices to be made. Now, not so much. Now they're in a good place, but financially. But yeah, there was a lot of sacrifices made. But ironically, we actually had a quite happy, um, you know, existence for a period, and then yeah, more recent times have been a bit more difficult. I wouldn't say we didn't have the technology. The technology was there. It was just a little bit more. You really had to work for it. Now people get it on credit. When we got the my first PlayStation, my PS2, some of my video games on PC, none of that was on finance. That was all earned. I had to earn it through doing my homework and all that. But my mum actually said, "No, I'm not buying on finance. We're buying everything outright, so when we can actually afford that item." So I was a little bit behind. My PlayStation and my PS2 I got quite early on when everyone else got them, but I didn't get my first Xbox 360 until 2013. I got I got my Xbox One in 20 was it 15 or 14? 2015 I got my Xbox One. Um, So I actually properly, and I bought that outright. I didn't buy that on finance. I bought that outright. I bought my TV outright. Not the first TV I've owned. I bought some second-hand ones, but um, So yeah, I think what we've seen in society and sport is a reflection of that. Let's go back to the sports side of things now. We've done the history, we've done this, the social history. Let's get back on sport. But I think what's happened since the 90s, yeah, there's definitely been a shift, and in the last 10 to 15 years, it's been a notable shift, and not necessarily in the positive. I think the greed aspect of a lot of people has taken over, and sport is a symptom of that. With the direction sport's taken, it's a symptom of what's going on in society with people being greedy and not looking after each other. Um, well, no, PC culture was there, mobile phones were there, but um, I do think the social media side of things has definitely distorted where we're at. And I think the greed aspect and has distorted where we're at. Um, have I been to the US? No, but I've got friends and family who have either lived or currently live in the US. Personally, myself, no. There's only a few areas of the USA that I want to visit. There's only a few places in the US that are on my bucket list. The West Coast is not on my bucket list. I do not want to go to LA. I do not want to go to Seattle. I don't want to go to Portland. I don't want to go to California, really, or Washington or Oregon. I'm more of a, if I'm going to visit the US, I want to go to the Rocky Mountain states in the Midwest. That would be where I want to go. Basically the flyover states, the states people forget about, like the Utahs and Colorados, New Mexico's, that kind of thing. Wyoming's, Idaho's, they're the states that I want to visit. They're not really known for their, flashy. Basically, the more rural and a little bit more laid back in their viewer life. Um, could Tommy Tornado reach 1,000 subs without a face reveal? Ooh. Well, actually, not having their face on camera. A lot of YouTubers have done that using graphics and stuff. Um, Gen X, no one complains about them. No, actually, the Generation X probably are. Gen Xers are probably the peak of humanity. It's been downhill. It was crap before then. It's been crap since then. That's my basic view on things. They're the current glue that's holding society together. But when they go, it's we're going to a shower of shit. Um, Best sporting decade. There isn't one. There isn't one. I don't think you can say the 70s were better than the 80s, or the 80s were better than the 90s, or the 2000s. I think that's a subjective way of looking at it because sport has evolved. Sport has evolved since the Second World War, and even before then. I think that is a very subjective. There's no right answer. To me, I think sport peaked in the 90s and the 2000s. For me personally, for quality of fitness. We didn't go too far into the analytics didn't really take over. The social media hadn't ruined it a little bit, and the saturation hadn't ruined it. The money hadn't ruined it. I think the balance was right in the 90s and the early 2000s. So the mid 90s to mid 2000s. I think that's the best period for me watching sport and learning about it and feeling a connection. But that's when I was growing up, formative years. Um, Although some sports I think have kicked on, other sports have regressed. I think I, I would say um, that's my favourite period is that time frame. But that's when when your snooker peak. 2000s. Pro wrestling again that mid 90s to mid 2000s. Um, the Attitude Era, basically the Monday Night Wars. That's the peak of wrestling. Um, I would say a lot of people do videos on here. Yes, Tommy. Not everyone will post regular content, but some people might just post something that happens in their everyday life. Going, oh look, you can't, a weather video or something's happening in their local town or city. But a lot of my subscribers do their own content. Not everyone, but there are some like you who just have an account to subscribe to other people's channels and stuff. Um, which is fine. That's fair. That's your prerogative and your choice. But a lot of my subscribers, not all of my, a lot of my subscribers have made at some point their own content or um, have made content or continue to make content. But not everyone. Some people just have an account to subscribe and view content. That's what they do. Um, but yeah, some I'm I some of my favorite YouTubers. Obviously, a lot of their viewers don't have content, but I'm one of those that will subscribe to like the hockey guy, for example. Um, he also does a lot of content. I do a lot of content. He's just further down the line in content creation, getting paid, doing a living, getting a living out of the platform, and fair play to him. I think where social media has gone wrong, and in relation to sport, I mean, State of Origin recently this year with Jerome Luai. Do I like Jerome Luai as a player and as a character and as a person? No. I think he does come across as an absolute tool. But the abuse he's had on social media since Game Two in State of Origin has been ridiculous. Same with Reece Walsh. He's got a fair bit of abuse on social media. There have been death threats. So look at Harry Maguire and what happened to him the last couple of seasons, where he got death threats, and so the social media aspect of relationship needs to be looked at, and how guidelines for social media use. Sort of Gary Lineker with his criticisms of the British government and what happened with Match of the Day this season, and him being stood down, and then we've seen with obviously Paul Kent in Australia, and what sport is yet to peak? Ooh, sport is yet. That's a good one. That's a good one. Um, I don't know. It's a good one. It's a good one. I think ice hockey. I think is yet to peak because the World Championships and some of these secondary nations like Great Britain and France that are, you know, and Italy that are getting into the top tier. What the Swiss team have done in recent years, I think they're I think they're the next nation to win the World Championships in the modern era. Again, and then really upset the Scandinavians, the Czechs, the Slovaks, the Russians, the US, and the Canadians. So your traditional, I think the Swiss are the ones that upset the Epcot, maybe the Germans. Um, yeah, social media has enabled people to be, well, Mike Tyson summed it up a couple of years ago, where now today, people, there's no repercussions for getting a punch in the face because they can say what they want on social media, and and the social media companies are trying to protect them basically by saying to governments you can't have unfiltered access to private messages and stuff, even if there is criminality being organised, like we're seeing in France. And Mike Tyson, not that I'm a fan of Mike Tyson, but him as an athlete, he was possibly one of the best pound for pound boxers of all time. When he's saying people now are gutless because they can hide behind a keyboard and there's no consequence for their actions because they're not going to get a punch in the face. Can you imagine some of these people that are threatening athletes and sports administrators and presenters? If they were to do that to Mike Tyson's face or Amanda Holyfield, they're going to be put on their arse, literally, and they're going to be put in A&E, and they're probably going to have sort of severe facial fractures. Um, um, but yeah, that's my view on it. Mike Tyson summed it up perfectly. There's no consequences for your actions anymore. No one gets a punch in the face, and it's true. It's true. No, there is no consequence. You don't get, a smack in the face anymore. Really. Um, the NBA peaked in the Nike Jordan. I think so. I think, as I said, the NBA in the '90s and the early 2000s has enabled the NBA now to be in a great financial position. Before then, it really was up shit's creek. In the '70s and '80s, it wasn't doing well, and then the Chicago Bulls dynasty comes along, and others like the Boston Celtics. There were other players, there were other teams, but Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Dennis Rodman, and that era of the late '80s to late '90s comes along, and the rest is history. Honestly, and there are other players as well, not just those three, and the dream team. at the Olympics, for example, comes along, and the rest is history. So there was a period where suddenly the NBA realised they had some marketable assets to sell all the franchises, not just the Chicago Bulls, and it worked. And the sport did peak. The interest peaked. It's not the same as what it was 20 years ago. Let's just say that, but it's in a better financial position because of that era. Ice hockey will benefit more from an Ice Hockey World Cup. Yeah, they've tried the World Cup format before. It's without the NHL on board, it doesn't work. So that's where the World Championships. I think they could do better at promoting themselves as a sport. Let's just say that. I've gone off boxing, more talk than action. True, I agree. The promoters really are dragging things out. Not the same. It's the same for people in the street. Use around mine are really rude to you because they've never been given a slap. They probably don't know how to fight, but occasionally stab each other. Yeah, there's been a yes. Let's not talk about um, the current state of gang violence and what's happening. It's yeah. I fear for my cousin who's had to move out of London to Sussex with some family friends. I do long term. Yeah, yeah. It's not get on to the. This is what's happening in France as well with the social disorder and the social unrest. Um, we're seeing it across Europe really, but France's issues go back a very very long way, and they're much more problematic than what's happening here in the UK. Um, let's say that. You're glad you don't live around many people. No, I prefer living where I am on the edge of town. I will say that. But I still live past right next to a major A road and a major B road. Let's just say that major. So there's still, even at like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, there's still traffic going past. Admittedly, intermittently, but the A road behind me is a link road basically between the A329M and the M4 and the M3. So if there's like a road closure, that's a secondary A road. That can get quite busy. Um, but I'm a 10-minute walk from the nearest shop. It's a 10-minute walk. It's a good walk. It's a straight road. I'm a 10-minute walk from the nearest train station. I'm in between two train stations on the main line, so I'm not too far. To me, transport's not too bad. But if I was in a more rural location, would I enjoy it? Maybe. I don't know. I still need to have some kind of interaction with a town or a village. I couldn't live completely in the arse end of nowhere. Um, we're quite lucky in the UK. Most of our population are from other countries. My ancestry goes back to various parts of the UK and Europe and North Africa. So for me, that was an interesting little wow kind of moment doing the research. But no, I couldn't. I couldn't live totally in the arse end of nowhere. But I wouldn't live later. But I wouldn't mind. Perfect scenario. Um, living in a little cottage in a small, just on the edge of a town or an edge of a village, with some fields and maybe some trees, maybe a little woodland nearby, in somewhere in in a rural location. That would be a small little cottage or a little terrace. Preferably a cottage, so I don't actually have to have a next door neighbour right there with a bit of land. That's it. But I wouldn't want to be too far from a town or a city. I would like to a little bit off the grid, but not off the grid. If that makes sense. Um, Maybe living in a small village where there's an aspect of community. I think, but far enough away from people to have my own peace and quiet, but close enough to go to the village shop or the pub. Shocker, have a pub lunch. I don't drink, but I eat pub food. To have that community aspect would do me. That's me. Do I see France the Rugby World Cup happening? Yes, it will happen. We had this discussion earlier in the stream. It will happen. I think there'll be a heightened security presence. Rugby union fans are different to rugby league and football fans. There's less disorder. They're more genteel. And in the provincial side of things in France, it is a religion. people from all backgrounds get involved. Provincially, France is different in the rural, small towns and smaller cities. In southwest France, the issues aren't as bad as what's happening in France as a whole. If you go into those more regional towns and villages, it's less of an issue with what's happening, but there is still a discontent between the government, the Elysee Palace, and the people on the street in France. There's a lot of things, lot going on. But saying that, I think there'll be a heightened security presence. Um, um, your nearest city or town is Bangor. That's not too bad. That's you're not you're far enough from civilization to go. Oh, it's quiet here, but you're not far enough away to go. Oh God, if there is like heavy snow or heavy rain, or there's an issue that I can't get, uh, help from ambulance, and if the internet goes down, you have to go somewhere. You can go somewhere and have a day out, go to see some museum. That's the kind of thing. But when we're talking about why certain parts of the UK don't have successful sports teams or aren't producing athletes, it's because of that rural nature. So the southwest and parts of Wales are very, very rural, and therefore you couldn't sustain a profession. This is why I'm surprised they put a professional rugby league team in Cornwall. I think while it's in the south of the UK, which is fantastic, it's in the wrong part of the south of the UK. It's in the south. It's in the arse end of Cornwall in Penrith. Or no, is it not Penrith? Oh, it's near Penzance. Um, they put a professional sports team in the worst location. Would you say Wales do okay for their population? Yeah, I think so. I think they do in all sport, but infrastructure and investment is an issue, and of course, sports finance. When you do have a very dispersed population in a large proportion of the country, where a small proportion of the country geographically has all the population, or the majority, like Swansea, Newport, Cardiff, and Llanelli, for example, in the south, where the professional rugby union is played, and professional football was played at a high standard, apart from obviously Wrexham. But then 90%, 95% of the country's got sheep and maybe a couple of small little towns and villages. Then yes, you are going to have sustainability issues when, for example, professional rugby league, professional rugby union, the rest of Wales has failed before. Yes, you do need to also not only try to think about the infrastructure, but funding and sponsorships. It is. Um, Look, they've tried it with rugby league, it didn't work, and they've tried it with rugby union before. With I think it was the Crusaders. I think it was the Celtic Crusaders they tried, and it failed. So it hasn't worked before in both codes. It won't work again unless they do massive infrastructure investment for transportation like road and rail and airports. It's not going to work. So unless they do a massive infrastructure building project um, around um, Llandudno and Conway with the castle and Bangor and Rill and places like that, it's not going to work. Um, Club rugby is dead here. I've been to Cardiff Blues. I think there is that growing disconnect between the fans and rugby union and the union itself. There's a lot of scandal at the Welsh Union. I could have done so many videos on Welsh Rugby Union, but I don't have a great relationship with Welsh Rugby Union fans. That soured in about 2019. There was a period where I was having a running battle with some Welsh Union fans over my perceived bias for England, which I can't see that. But I think there is a growing disconnect between um, what were passionate rugby union community and rugby league communities, passionate communities, and the governing bodies. Um, but I think yes, um, but I think Welsh rugby union fans, unfortunately, a lot of them are quite toxic when it comes to not being able to take criticism of the situation and people critiquing. Like Warren Gatland, some of his statements in the press make me believe he was aware of what was going. There's a reason why he stood down in 2019. There's a reason why they brought him back. When he said he wasn't aware of how bad the situation, basically half his team have just basically said we're retired from international rugby union. So he's basically going to be selecting the under-21s and the reserves to go to the World Cup. Wales are in trouble. Warren Gatland is not the saviour that the media portray him to be. And Welsh rugby union's in right up shit creek without a paddle. Um, I can't say Wales needs to reduce. I mean, I think what's happened is the Pro League was set up partly because Welsh rugby union got into the shits in the late 90s because professionalism, how they does it, isn't it's not working. But in saying that, what people are like really, you know, saying Wrexham and Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds and their takeover and bringing positivity back to sport was yes. There's been a lot of negative headlines about Swansea and Cardiff City over the years, and Newport County with the various financial issues those clubs have had and bad ownership. Wrexham as well. Wrexham is a positive feel-good story. It is. Obviously, Wales qualifying for World Cups and Euros is a positive feel-good story for the sport. But yeah, I don't know. We would like to see an English and Welsh joint club structure, basically. I think that's a way forward. I wouldn't say have only just two Welsh clubs. I would say they would have to look at the four Welsh provinces now and go, right, bring back your place name like Swansea or Neath, whatever, Newport Gwent, and they would have to enter the rugby union system in England, and maybe that could be a way to sustain um, both English and Welsh club rugby, absolutely. But then you would have to allow Welsh players to play in England and English players to play in Wales. And you would also have to have both unions get on board. Both unions don't like each other. Is this the peak of Welsh football? I don't know. We'll have to see how far Wrexham can get with the current ownership, and we have to see what happens with the other three clubs as well. Cardiff are in the shits. They've got some ownership issues, and they're going through managers like Ben out of fashion. Swansea have declined a little bit. The ring fencing. Yeah, that was a reactionary policy, which has done no favours. They basically was designed to get Saracens back in and protect them because money and the gutless nature of the governance of the game, which has cost three professional sides, including a very successful side in Wasps and a very successful side London Irish on the field. But Wasps' issues go back to when they moved to Coventry, whereas London Irish and Worcester was COVID and struggling to pay back the loans that the government gave out. I mean, look, I think at some point the Welsh provinces will ultimately have to leave the United Rugby Championship and join with England, but it would require both unions to, man up, admit they fucked up. Yeah, I'm dropping f bombs because I've got pissed off with the sport I used to love, and go right. This is how the club game's going to go forward. Get rid of that. You must play in England and Wales to be eligible to qualify for the selection. Sod that. Allow the players to play it in France, in Ireland, for example, in Major League Rugby if they want to, if they're a younger player developing, that kind of thing. Get rid of these protectionist selection rules that are actually harming the game, and then just work together rather than against each other. But the Welsh Union likes self-harming, and the English Union's the old boys club. So the governance side of the sport in the UK is Ireland's got it right. Scotland's got its own issues with just not enough. Scottish sport's got issues where just the money isn't there, and that's to do with the TV companies collapsing and youth development not working and a lot of social deprivation. And there's issues north of the border. Ireland, both Northern Ireland and the Republic, have got rugby union bang on with their four provinces and their amateur game and their semi-pro game, and then they've also got their Gaelic Association sports bang on. And to be fair, Northern Ireland have punched well above their weight in football, both men's and women's as well. So, and there are money issues in football in Ireland, but rugby union, Ireland are world leading. Let's not kid ourselves. Ireland are world leading. Their four provinces are very successful. Their player development is second to none. Uh, I would akin Ireland to New Zealand in the Southern Hemisphere. They are churning out talent. They're winning the Six Nations a lot. And if they can't win the World Cup this year, then I think the French will do it. Um, um, yeah, I wouldn't mind a similar kind of, but has it worked for rugby league in this country? The money's dried up. The money was there in the 90s and the 2000s. It's not now. So look at the ex NRL, well, the Australian and Kiwi and Pacific Island talent that we are getting over is not of the same caliber of what it was in the 90s and the 2000s. The money is dried up in rugby league in this country. Rugby league is just the money isn't there. Um, Once proud teams are going semi-pro, like the London Broncos. Um, and you look at the stadium infrastructure, some of the stadiums are in a terrible state. I mean, look what happened to the Bradford Bulls. They went up creek, didn't they? So the financial crash of the mid to late 2000s hurt rugby league, and then the TV deal became worthless, basically. And the quality is not of the standard it was in the late 90s to the late 2000s. That was its purple patch in this country, and the game hasn't grown in the southern half of the UK like it should have. And again, in part, the financial crisis. Um, but the fact we've got three professional league structure is better than rugby union. Let's just say that. Even though there's less registered players and less clubs, the professional game is working better in rugby league, but the money has dried up. And until there's a way of improving the financial state of rugby league is going to end up like rugby union. I mean, we have seen teams like Widnes, for example, and Bradford end up in administration, and teams like London Broncos go to part-time status, which shouldn't be the case. So there are money issues in league, but they're not as shocking, let's say, as in union. But the same teams win all the time, so it is what it is. Colwyn Bay from National League North to yeah, in Wales, national team rugby, professional club game football, amateur game rugby. Yeah, I think Welsh professional sports at a crossroads. In the individual sports like snooker and boxing, Wales has got a fantastic and cycling and pro cycling. Wales have got a fantastic track record in producing athletes and motorsport. But in the team sports, it's club football where I think things are going in a positive direction at the moment. But yeah, Wales, I think, from sports at crossroads. Yeah, they're great at darts, cycling, pro cycling. There's some good cyclists come from Wales. Snooker, they've always produced great snooker players. And boxing, they've always produced great boxers. Like Joe Calzaghe, for example, was a fantastic boxer. So certain sports, Wales continues to produce talent. Oh yeah, Cardiff Devils, yes. In the elite league, you could say yes. They've done very well in ice hockey, yes. I mean, Anthony Chinn's still going, by the way, for Great Britain international. He's still playing. That is, occasionally you do need government funding to get projects done, and then you can get anchor tenants as teams in or events in, like the Olympic Park, for example, with the Copper Box and the London City Stadium. But yeah, the debate about using taxpayer money to build facilities is not just a UK thing. It's a thing in the US, it's a thing in Canada, it's a thing in Europe. We're seeing this debate in regards because a friend of mine is a Calgary Flames fan, and I said the Saddle Domes last night. We're having a chat on Messenger, and he was like, "Yeah, the Saddle Dome, you've got me there." Yeah, and there's a debate about how much taxpayer money and how much private equity is used to um, build a replacement arena for the Saddle Dome. It's the same with the Arizona situation about where their new arena is going to build if they are to stay in Arizona because the Tempe deal collapsed. And again, they're saying it's all going to be private money, no taxpayer money. That's their selling point because they want to continue to stay. And that was a big deal when it came to the proposals for the Tempe Entertainment District, which could still be the Mesa Entertainment District or the Glendale Entertainment, whatever part of the Phoenix metropolitan area they go to. Um, the Maruello, the owner of the Coyotes, the majority owner, saying, it's going to be private money. There's no going to be no taxpayer money used in the development. Um, I don't mind volleyball. I've played it. It's fun to play. It's really interesting to play, actually. Very physically demanding. But I don't mind. Indoor volleyball, I think, is better than beach volleyball. But beach volleyball is where the sport originates, which is why the Brazilians and the Aussies are quite good at it, ironically, is because they have a lot of nice beaches where you can play. But indoor volleyball is actually really brutal. You've got to be built like a basketball player, so you've got to be very, very athletic, tall. Although you do have the short players, but you've got to basically be really athletic. Your knees are destroyed by the time you're 30. So your career's short. But no, actually, it's good fun. I actually like volleyball, not just because the women playing it are actually stunning, especially beach volleyball, but which is a good selling point. But I actually really do enjoy volleyball. Um, Watching it, the athleticism you've got to have to be a volleyball player is ridiculous. Indoor or outdoor or beach volleyball, it's ridiculous. Um, um, yeah, I think again, if marketed properly, um, yeah, it could be a very profitable sport and attract decent crowds. Um, but again, you need that sporting infrastructure in place, especially in regards to indoor volleyball, which is just volleyball. You need to have an indoor arena and you need to market it in a certain way. But you get decent crowds. The Olympics prove it's quite a popular sport with spectators. They enjoy watching it. Um, the team indoor volleyball, I think, is better than beach volleyball. Um, and you could actually have a professional league, yes. My the thoughts on the trans competition sport. I think we covered it. I think common sense needs to prevail. Um, Unfortunately, there is a minority. That was no, it's just a very annoying fly that's going to end up in the spider web and die. My thoughts on the trans sport debate. Common sense needs to prevail. How many female um, transgender people we've converted to male are competing in male sports? None. Let that sink in. Let that sink in. I think we do need to seriously have a common sense debate, which we're not allowed to have. Um, I think it does set back women's rights. It's a political issue for social. That fly is going to annoy me intensely. It's got in the flat, no doubt. It's a debate we need to have, but people are scared of having because of a very, very small of the culture wars, cancel culture minority of the left. Who um, So there's that. But I feel sorry for the female athletes who work so hard to get their sport professional, get their sport recognised, be allowed to compete in sport, um, you know, be involved in sports administration. Um, it does risk putting off female athletes from participating and young girls and teenagers from especially because the surveys have been done where they look at participation in sport and how it drops off for women massively after education. Um, and so this could risk female sports participation after your early 20s, and then also in schools dropping off uh, drastically. Get the swatter out. I mean, Christ, I don't read newspaper. I don't have a fly swat. So it's very concerning. I think we need to approach this with a common sense rationale, and unfortunately, we're not allowed to do that because of a very, very small, angry, vocal, shouty minority who really, every time the debate is put in a common sense debate, they're destroyed in debate. But they don't allow you to have that debate because they Um, yeah, I think we need to give them their own category. Honestly, give them their own category. But how many women who've transitioned to being men legally do you see competing in men's sport? None. It's the other way around. So let that sink in. But it does set back women's sport a long way if this is allowed to continue. It needs to be a common sense approach. We have a trans category, a separate category, and then that completely gets rid of the problem because then they have their own category where they can compete against each other in a fair way. Because we like fair competition, do we not? Um, but that is as political as I get on that. I think yeah, the LGBTQ plus community have faced a lot of you know unjustness in society, and it's a civil rights movement thing. Uh, and yes, it is male to female transitioned athletes. That is the sticking point. How many female to male athletes there are none. So we're letting in. But that's the only thing I think they need their separate category. It's not let's keep the LGBT community out of sports, not at all. Um, that is not what we want to do. But I think it does set back women's sport, where there are a lot of LGBTQ members who are bisexual and lesbian who compete in women's sport. Who've done a lot to get women's sport to the platform it is at. Um, yeah. Basketball, tennis is one of those sports where you have the mixed doubles, and badminton you have mixed doubles, and squash you have mixed doubles, and it works very very well where a male athlete and a female athlete work as a team. Um, so um, I think male and female basketball players, yeah, volleyball you can have mixed. You have mixed men's and women's doubles in volleyball and beach volleyball. So it can work where you have mixed a male and female athlete together in some professional sports. Look at the mixed doubles in tennis. Why I will be watching some of the Wimbledon games when I can, work permitting. The mixed doubles sometimes is some of the best matches to watch. They're some of the most entertaining matches to watch. Um, um, but yeah, would I think the shock factor initially people would watch it, and then um, the curiosity factor, and after that, no one would watch it. Wouldn't be profitable. Um, and then there'll be someone complaining, "Oh, why are we not making any money?" Because no one cares. Um, really, I honestly, they keep adding letters and symbols to it. It's just like why can't just call it the Pride movement now? Um, uh, I do think you know they have faced a lot of stigma in society, and there have been in some countries it's illegal to be gay still, and you still get imprisoned and even executed for your preferences on who your partner is. There's a lot of restrictions on a lot of things in society, but in some countries. In saying that, um, they do deserve their place at the table in society, and then even in sports administration and sports fandom. But I think you need a separate trans category. That will solve a lot of the problems because it does impede on women's rights in society and sport, especially in sport. It really sets them back 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We don't want that. I'm a massive advocate for women's sport. I like watching women's rugby league, women's rugby union, women's football. I think they are fantastic athletes for what they're doing. Um, Admittedly, some of the high profile women's football players do their sport a massive disservice by being really, really just annoying with some of their um, angry outbursts. Megan Rapinoe notwithstanding. Not a big fan of her. I think she's the worst spokesman to have for women's football. Um, but I think they have faced a lot of challenges. But I'm a massive fan. I really enjoy watching women's sport because I think it's more refreshing about how they approach and play it. Women's rugby league is brutal. Women's rugby union is brutal, but the way they approach and play it is actually refreshing to watch because they play it how it should be played. So there you go. There's none of these diving and rolling around and abusing the referee. Um, um, the respect for the officials is a lot better. The way they approach playing, especially women's rugby league, I think is I'm a big fan of the NRLW, and that's expanding this year to 10 teams. They're ahead of schedule on expansion. There may be 8 teams this year. They went, actually, no, we'll have 10, because the uptake in participation is there and the quality levels there. But there's enough players of a high enough standard to have 10 professional teams. Women's Origin this year, I don't like the format of State of Origin this year because technically, if we didn't have aggregate score, it'd been a one-all drawn series, which means Queensland would have won anyway. Queensland would have retained the Shield anyway, but the way New South Wales won game 2 but didn't win by enough points, neither side could celebrate really. I think, but I am looking forward to the NRLW season. There's 4 new teams, including Kane. Thank you very much. But I think we are at a crossroads in women's pro sport as well. The WNBA barely breaks even. It needs the NBA support. The women's ice hockey, the union have now taken over. Women's ice hockey union, players union have taken over in the running and governance of the sport completely, and they've merged all the leagues together. Um, um, uh, uh, the women's college softball was given a lot of coverage. It's collegiate sport. I follow the pro league, especially the NHL and AHL and ECHL, for example. But I do know that's another difference between Europe and the US is the collegiate system. The fact that ESPN really decided to give that a big push this year, I don't know what the reasoning and the rationale behind that from ESPN, but obviously it's secured the softball programs in the NCAA more funding. And there's clearly been a massive uptake in women playing softball at university in the US, which means there's obviously a demand for the sport for athletes and those colleges with the fans turning up, watching the collegiate sports. So the ESPN have gone, okay, we've seen a massive upsurge for whatever reason in women's softball. We'll promote that. I think that's probably their rationale for that. How they promoted it, I don't know. I can't comment on US broadcasters about how they pushed the content or promoted the content, but I know that ESPN, obviously with the NCAA, has that agreement to broadcast, and collegiate sports in the US get massive ratings, stupid ratings, like March Madness in basketball, for example. It's ridiculous. Yeah, I'm quite critical of broadcasters in this country, not just the BBC. I'm critical of a lot of them. It's more of the quality of broadcasting when I'm looking at a live sports broadcast and commentary. The quality of commentary and the broadcast teams has dropped. And that, again, is to do with executive decisions about, okay, who's going to be the host, who's going to be the pundits, who's going to be the commentators. I think the quality of journalism has got worse. Sports journalism, including mainstream journalism, is not what it was 20 years ago. And I think also attribute social media to that to a certain extent. But I don't think it detracts from the quality on the field or on the rink or in the arena, to me. And I think women's sport, the quality is massively improved. Men's sport, I think the quality has stagnated and declined, ironically. Women's football, cricket, and rugby are all quite popular in the UK. Yes, I think they're growing in popularity. More girls and women at grassroots level are, playing at community level. But again, there's still that massive very marked drop off of participation at the end of education. So if you leave school or sixth form or further education, if you go to a technical college, for example, university, and then you go into the workplace, there is that drop off in participation, more so in women than in men, and more so in minority backgrounds in women than in men. Still very noticeable. It's not as bad as it was 5, 10, 20 years ago, but it's very, very noticeable that once you finish your school or your university education or college education in this country, so your technical colleges, so your apprenticeships and all that, the participation drops off um, massively. Certain sports, not so much, like netball, for example, the participation levels drop off less, but it does drop off. Um, although we are starting to see both league and union when it comes to rugby participation levels increase, which is good to see somewhat, and the quality level goes with that, and the player base goes with that. But yeah, there's still that. Chinese women's table tennis, no, because I know it's fixed. Yeah, have you not realised this about Pacific Asian nation sport? It's all fixed. Have you not heard about the massive match fixing scandals and fixing scandals in Asian sport? There's no point in watching any professional Chinese sport because of the match fixing. It's been a thing for the last 10 years. The Chinese government are actually trying drastically to cut down it because all the triads are involved. Um, and yeah, no, the Chinese Super League football was all fixed. Massive match fixing scandals. Wouldn't watch it because I know the result is already predetermined. I'd rather watch I'd rather watch pro wrestling, which fallen out of love with. Even though I used to love it, and I still occasionally watch it. I'd rather watch pro wrestling than any Chinese domestic sport. Um, I think the quality of commentators, presenters, and pundits has got worse, and the quality of female sports has got worse. And I think it's quality of sports journalism across the board. It doesn't matter if they're focusing on men's sport, women's sport, mixed sport, like the mixed doubles at Wimbledon, for example, or Roland Garros. Across the board, the Olympic coverage over the last couple of Winter and Summer Olympics has been universally panned. Dreadful. Um, and look at the lineup changes with the BBC. ITV, not so much. ITV is bearable. I think they've got the right female ex-athletes in who are commentating on their sport to a certain extent. Their motorsport coverage is still good on the touring cars. Can't knock it for that. They've basically kept the same presenting team for the last decade, and they're a good presenting team, and they're all ex-drivers. Steve Ryder is I used to do his bins actually. Steve Ryder lives locally. He's a very good main host. The co-hosts he has, they've all been involved in motorsport for years. I think lives locally. He's a very good main host. The co-hosts he has, they've all been involved in motorsport for years. I think better. What the rebranding of BT Sport gives us better Olympic Games coverage. Well, obviously Eurosport, obviously being merged into that in a couple of years' time. I don't think the actual sports they're going to cover is going to change too much. I don't think the commentary on the Eurosport side of things is going to change too much. In saying that, it's still losing money. So the fact that the BT Group had to get overseas Warner Brothers Discovery to invest in BT Sport and then basically buy it out as a controlling state tells you about how much it's hemorrhaged financially since it was brought in. Well, Steve Ryder, Steve Ryder is one of those media personalities outside of his presenting duties is very under the radar. And he's in his 70s now, Steve Ryder. Steve Ryder will retire at some point. He used to do Grandstand, the US Masters, he did. He now does the British touring cars on ITV4. Yeah, he keeps alive. He's not one of those who's got a high profile outside of his duties. He's near the end of his broadcasting career now. He's winding it down. He's had a very, very good broadcasting career, but he's slowly winding down. I don't know who will replace him eventually on ITV when it comes to the British touring cars. He is in his 70s. He's in his early 70s, I think. I have met him. I used to do his bins. He has a very nice Jag. He has a very, very nice Jag. He's got a very, very nice XJ. Is it an XJ Sovereign V8? He's got very nice late 2000s Jag saloon. Very, very nice. I grew up with Grandstand. I'm one of the last. I'm one of I would say of the millennials, I'm one of the mid millennials, late Gen X, early millennial generation. That crossover who grew up with Grandstand because it obviously stopped in the early 2000s. Generation. That crossover who grew up with Grandstand because it obviously stopped in the early 2000s. My brother doesn't even know what Grandstanding because he was born the year it stopped. My brother is as old as Grandstand coming off the air. That's how long it's been since we've had Grandstand. It's been over 20 years. Um, I've only met him a few times, Steve Ryder, but he seems quite decent. He seems like a normal bloke. He seems really normal. Wouldn't think um, he's, I wouldn't call him a celebrity really, but what is an early, mid to late millennial? Well, I'm born in '89, so I think Gen X ends officially in '85, '86. So I'm an early millennial basically. A mid millennial was the mid '90s, and then I think my brother could be classed as a millennial technically because he's born just after the millennium. My brother was born in 2002. I was born in 1989. Big difference between me and my brother. Me and my sister's only a handful of years. I think my sister's technically classed as a Gen X. I can't remember. I think I don't know how they categorize, the baby boomer generation, Gen X, millennials, all this kind of, you know, Gen Y. I think is the current sprogs coming out, but they come up with these terms to categorize a 25-year period. Um, um, okay, so there you go. So millennial was 8 on the 96. Okay, so my brother's not a millennial. There you go. It's because our youth, basically, our education and our youth ended, at the time of the some knobhead was parking in front of your garage, so you couldn't get access. So you were going around the estate looking for him, right piss take. That's pretty standard fare for the West Midlands. I can imagine that Brummy accent going, "Oh, cool. What's all right, knobhead? He's blocking me access. I can't get you over at the garage. I'm going to take him down to the mechanic." um, I did like Grandstand, yes. I like the way we take the piss out of someone badly parking and blocking your access. I mean, if that's America, that's ending up on YouTube with a Karen complaining, going, knocking on your ring doorbell, going, "You're blocking my access. Go off my property." Um, um, yeah, so they'll probably get a diversity order. But I don't know. I think the ITV4 presenting team is actually not the most diverse. I'm going to say that now. But a lot of them were involved with the F1 when it was on ITV as well. A lot of their production team, camera crew, they used to do the old F1 coverage back in the day. So they might get someone from Sky Sports F1. They might. I mean, they could get Susie Perry to do it. That'd be fantastic. Susie Perry loves her motors. I mean, she's obviously done the MotoGP. She's on the superbikes. I think she's done the Isle of Man TT a couple of times covering it as a journo. Susie Perry would be a fantastic addition to do the presenting. Susie Perry, that would get a lot more eyes on the product. Tell you that. Susie Perry is fantastic, and she knows her stuff. Massive. I've read art. I mean, Susie Perry. I mean, I remember 20 odd years ago when MCM magazine was out. I used to follow the superbikes and MotoGP that way. She did a lot of articles for MCN back in the day as well. Um, but she was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. When MotoGP was on free to air coverage on the originally on Channel 5, and then it went to the BBC. And when Superbikes was more accessible, she was brilliant. I would have Susie Perry presenting ITV4's coverage of the British Touring Cars in the Heart. Maybe bring back Charlie Cox as well. He was brilliant back in the 90s, commentating alongside Samari Walker. Um, but I think it's going to be interesting to see who ITV do get to eventually replace Steve Ryder. Um, Maybe Claire Balding. Get Claire Balding to do it. Honest to God, Susie Perry, Claire Balding. Um, but no, I mean, I grew up Grandstand. I grew up with Des Lynam and Steve Ryder on the BBC. Then they moved to ITV. That is what's very, very interesting. Matt Letizia, God, I've seen him play. I've actually seen him play in the flesh. He's a brilliant player. Injuries did him, though, but brilliant player. Who's going to replace Jeff Stelling? Well, it's not going to be Laura Woods because she's got a TNT Sports, and I thought Laura Woods would have been a really good replacement. Honestly, don't know. I think whoever they get to play, if they get it wrong, it's going to hurt Sky Sports. Losing Jeff and Cammy, I think, is getting rid of Soccer Saturday and Soccer AM. Well, basically, Soccer Saturday lineup and Soccer AM. They, they, yeah, they've cost themselves a lot of viewers there. And I think if they get his replacement wrong, it's going to have implications. Basically, if you can't remember the millennium unless you forget your memory, you ain't a millennial. Yeah, I remember that. I remember that 99 2000 period very very. That was one of my favourite summers. Was the summer of '99 was a fantastic time. Um, fantastic. Euro 2000 was a fantastic tournament as well. I remember Italy France was the final, and Toldo got the #1 job because Buffon injured his hand. I thought they would get Jules, possibly, possibly. Simon Jordan, would he balance that with his TalkSport commitments? That could be very interesting. Um, so we'll see. We'll see. Simon Jordan. No, I think Simon Jordan's better on TalkSport. He's better on radio than TV. And I think he's a little bit too old. Midweek games. Oh, I can't remember now. Andy Goldstein, get him on there. Get him off radio. Get him off TalkSport because he does my nut. It'll be interesting to see who replaces Jeff. But Jeff, he was the right person at the right time in the early '90s to get on that program to front the Saturday Football Premier League coverage, and it's worked for a very very. Sport is like LBC, LBC. There's only a couple of presenters I actually can stand, and Jim White and Simon Jordan. I can't stand Jim White, but I find Simon Jordan hilarious. I used to hate Simon Jordan, couldn't stand him. He's grown on me. Still don't agree with everything he says, but I will listen to his show because he likes arguing with the guests. When I talk sport, like Gabby Bonhor, can't understand a word he says. Trevor Sinclair should just have lost his job. Dean Saunders should have lost his job. I'm not comfortable with that kind of. And they're too football centric. I think if they were to cover some more sports, I think it could get a broader appeal. But they've got some good presenters on there. But yeah, they have got some. Yeah. But again, TalkSport, much like Sky Sports, much like ITV, much like BBC, Channel 4, even Channel 5 with some of their sports coverage, they have changed their presenting lineups. The fact we've got an American discussing about Darren Bent is hilarious. From Pittsburgh discussing Darren Bent. Obviously, he's listened to TalkSport on YouTube and watched the live streams. The fact an American, the US, is discussing Darren Bent, I never thought I would see the day. But this is the joy of having this platform and having this channel, is we can have that debate. Darren Bent. For recently retired players, Micah Richards for me as an up and coming ex-player, current pundit and presenter is fantastic. I love Micah Richards. Absolutely love Micah Richards. His enthusiasm, his energy, and his sense of humour. He's so self-deprecating. Micah Richards is brilliant. He's brilliant on live broadcasts. When he's doing a bit of commentaries, he's fantastic. His enthusiasm, he's grasping it with both hands. Watching the FA Cup final coverage, Micah Richards was enthusiastic. He was infectious. Watching him in internationals, he's infectious. I think Micah Richards, going forwards, has a very, very good career in broadcasting. It's a shame his career was ended as early as it was by injury. It's a crying ass shame of Micah Richards because he was a fantastically up and coming young player, had a decent England career, decent professional career, played at the highest level. Micah Richards is, and unfortunately injury did his career early, but he's still physically, look at him, he goes to the gym. You can imagine Micah Richards playing, rugby league as an interchange forward and rugby union as like a flanker, number 8 back row. He is a big boy. He goes to the gym. Um, let's just say he barely fits into his suit, so you can tell he's kept himself in physically really good shape post retirement. Um, Micah Richards, yeah, he could definitely sell the sport to new fans in the US and Canada when it comes to the World Cup in a few years' time. Micah Richards, he's very affable, very likable, and his raw youthful enthusiasm. He's like a school kid who's um, just enthusiastic. He's like that young teenage player who burst through with Man City all those years ago as a teenager before the takeover. He actually predates the Abu Dhabi takeover with his first appearances in the Prem. He um yeah, fantastic. Do I like Roy Keane? Some of his Roy Keaneisms. Um, yeah, I like his dry sense of humour. Roy Keane, he's an angry man, but I but he's passionate because he loves the industry he's in. Um, I like Roy Keane as a player? No. But do you need that type of character in a dressing room? Yes. Does the modern game lack the Roy Keanes and Gattusos and the Vinnie Joneses of today? Yes. The modern game needs our men like that. We don't have enough of them. But some of his, yeah, Roy Keane is an interesting character. Um, but he's a no nonsense kind of guy. Well, his managerial career hasn't been great. I wouldn't say it's been a success. He's still giving it a crack at several clubs, and he's a no nonsense kind of character. He doesn't, you know, he packs a punch and holds no prisoners. Um, he's ruthless. Uh, Paul Scholes couldn't tackle, but my God, he was a damn good midfielder. Um, Tackling wasn't his strong point. But he wasn't a nasty character. He just wasn't very good at tackling. That wasn't for a midfielder in the modern game. You need to be able to do it end to end, box to box. But his engine was fantastic. His passing range was fantastic. When he scored goals, they were goal of the month candidates. They weren't just like runs in the box to get a tap in. They were 30, 40 yard pile drivers. His distribution was fantastic. You wouldn't find a better passer of the ball. Um, Tackling was his downfall. I don't think he was intentionally a dirty player; just couldn't tackle very well. Um, but other than that, he was nearly the perfect midfield player. And it was also fantastic. He played his entire career at Man United. I believe he had an eye injury, which is why he had a lengthy spell out of the game with an eye injury. I think he detached his retina. He couldn't pick up the depth perception of the ball, and I think that's what led to his retirement was an eye injury. I think he had a detached retina from I think either a collision of heads or something happened and he injured his eye, and he was getting blurry vision and he couldn't pick up the ball when it was being in the football club. Whether he was very good at as owning Chris perfectly, but he's been involved in investing in sport for a very very long time. He's very the questions because these investors are going to look after the interests of the sport they're investing in. Do I agree with everything he comes out with? No. He should be a politician. But at the same time, Simon Jordan as a broadcaster is a much better club owner because he has been brought up to task about how many times did Palace get relegated and have money issues and how many managers did you have. He has been brought to task on that. But yeah, that. Jim White, I find a little bit of a ugh, but Simon Jordan really he does sometimes argue with the guest co-host. It could be Danny Murphy, it could be Dean Ashton. He does also like to argue with the guests as well. And some of his rants are quite hilarious. Some of his blow ups on the radio are quite funny. So I might see what Simon Jordan's had to say this week on Talksport. He might have something very interesting to say. But it's that if or two before the World Cup, or let's say over a year ago, I would have had a different opinion. I think he's grown on me a little bit, but I still do not agree with everything he is saying. Although as time goes on, and the older I get, more open minded now than what I was when I was younger. Never thought I would see the day that that would be a thing. Um, but I don't agree with everything he says, and that I think is someone. to be a co-host who can be a bit divisive, but where you can sort of see the pros and cons of their argument and debate them and say, I don't agree with that. But he does like some of his rants are legendary. When he goes after someone and he's having a go at them, when he goes after someone and he's having a go at them, or the English version of Paul Kent in Australia, except Paul Kent's got himself a bit of pop bother legally. Simon Jordan doesn't have that kind of issue away from his job, but he is the English version of Paul Kent of NRL 360, and if you follow the rugby league in Australia, you'll know him for his racist remarks about Marcel Desailly. Frank Boff, his career never recovered after the sleaze scandals because of his extracurricular promising, allowed to compete again. He's lost 4 years of his career because of a doping violation. That's really interesting. He was hung out to dry to a certain extent. I think with him though it was quite obvious. Drink and drug culture. I think profile athletes should, and then we have some of the allegations. It's like they've learnt nothing from the Ben Cousins. It's he's the cops'